This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. Kelly. Happy birthday to you. Hey, Brad Kelly, how are you?
I'm okay. I was a better about 45 seconds ago.
I had to do something that was perfunctory that competed with your David Foster Wallace intro.
No, that was great.
I feel like we're starting dueling intros here on Art of Darkness, the number one podcast about the dark side of creativity. I'm Kevin Kautzman. Who do you think that means we're covering today on this core episode, Brad?
That we are covering Marilyn Monroe.
Woo!
Right? Yeah.
Big Air, Norma Jean, Marilyn.
Mm-hmm.
Where to begin? It is going to be an exciting episode. I have a mild cold.
Okay.
I have been taking some cough medicine.
Excellent.
Please bear with me as I take us through the life of this legend, this complicated legend. I'm going to, first say she's a poster.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't always cover posters.
Right.
Chiron is not a poster.
Right.
Crowley is a poster, but he's not a
Kind of.
poster the way that Marilyn is.
Yeah.
Right?
Nice.
She's a figure that is truly larger than life, at the risk of committing a cliche right at the top of our episode.
Mm-hmm.
My approach to this is that we're gonna hear as much as we can from her book, My Story, which was written with a co-author, and there's some I guess ambivalence about how much of it she truly authored, how much of it was zhuzhed up from interviews.
Sure.
But I think given Marilyn is one of the American lives that has been poured over as much or more than almost any other life, I feel like this text and like getting her voice was the best approach. So we're going to go back and forth between the Wikipedia for her bio, which is exhaustive. The Wikipedia is like, just, I mean, she's an enigma. She's a cipher. She's It's just an incredible story. I think we all know how it ends, but let's start with the Art of Darkness question for the birthday boy himself.
It is my birthday pretty soon.
Well, there you are.
uh,
What do you know about Marilyn Monroe?
I just know that she's sort of um perhaps the most major American sex symbol of the 20th century. I don't
Mm.
really even know what sex symbol means now that I just said that, but she's sort of apparently defined uh the erotic and this sort of erotic taste of a moment of a generation kind of. And so like you said, she is sort of this iconic figure who, I just know I know her as a series of images, right? A woman, standing over the ventilation grate with the dress going up, and she was the first Playboy. I don't know if she was even a playmate at that point, but the first centerfold.
Right. There's a story about that where he pulled it from some other calendar pinup, I believe. Yeah.
So, I've heard a little bit. I know a little bit about that story just from hearing something recently. Died fairly young after being sort of involved with a number of notable men, Arthur Miller and the baseball player. Was it Joe DiMaggio?
Yeah, Joe DiMaggio. Jumpin' Joe DiMaggio.
Jumpin' Joe DiMaggio, and probably others. I know.
Oh, there were others.
Yeah, and there's stories about like sexual exploitation, but I don't know any of the details about any of that. Like I don't know what happened at all.
We're gonna get into it. It's a big nothing changes moment.
Right.
The pod. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's about it. I know she was in a number of films, and if my understanding is right, her acting ability. I've never seen a movie she was in.
Really?
To my understanding, people have sort of surprised by her acting chops. So I don't know what that means. And I know she came from kind of humble beginnings.
Humble is a word, Dickensian.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, about as Dickensian as it could get for the period. In America.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll come to it. And we're getting ready to do Bukowski later this year. So kind of a female flip side to this sort of youth in LA. I think you'll see. Yeah, it's going to be fun. Very heavy. This is a suicide episode. So let's go. Everything you said is accurate. She casts just a tremendously long shadow, and we're going to get into all of it. This will not be comprehensive. It's impossible, but we'll do our best over the next X number of hours to get you a feeling for Marilyn in her own words. Going to be fun.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Sorry, what are we doing in the After Dark for patrons only at patreon.com/artofdarkpod, where if you are a subscriber for every episode, you get 20 to 30 minutes of bonus material per episode. That's per core episode, like we're doing now, and per dark room episode, our more interview-ish episodes. We do it after dark after each one of those. So if you subscribe, you get that content for free, plus access to the Bookends Reading Club.
The Bookends Reading Club, and we are doing Borges Ficciones next. Brad, tomorrow we'll be recording the core episode for Borges.
I'm not even going to get out of the seat.
No, you're just going to stay there.
I'm staying here. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin, and you'll put the slipper on. Yeah. So, right. And now with the Bookends Club, you choose your level of involvement. So if you want to join us on Zoom and talk about Ficciones and the other books that we're covering this year, you're welcome to. If you just want to listen back later on Patreon, you're welcome to do that. That is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We've had a banger month for Patreon. If we can do this month over month, we'll be very, very happy. We genuinely appreciate the support. We love all of our listeners. Extra smooches for the Patreon supporters, and please consider supporting the pod. We do 24 core episodes like this a year, and I challenge you to find independent media delivering this the way that we do, and we hope you enjoy. There are lots of ways to support the pod. If you can't support us financially, tell people about it. If everybody listening now tells 5 people, we'll be very happy campers. All right. So on the After Dark for Marilyn, I've got this Capote book, Music for Chameleons. And there is an entire story section about a time when Capote and Monroe in 1955 went to a funeral together.
Oh,
and I think I'm going to read more from that and possibly read all of it. I have a feeling it's like 7-8 pages. I might not read all of it. But it's this will be fun. That'll be a fun after dark. It's called A Beautiful Child. And then I also am going to go a little deeper into Marilyn and the Kennedys, the Kennedy boys.
Okay.
We're not going to dwell on that too much during the core episode here. Wikipedia is surprisingly thin on the matter. I don't know what the editors, maybe the editors got a call. I don't know. Maybe it was it's unsubstantiated. Who knows? And this is part of the problem covering Marilyn. There's a lot of ambivalence. There's a lot of uncertainty. This is one of the reasons I think that Blonde film is such an interesting approach to her, because there's almost no other way to do a biopic short of like presenting the image of her. It's a very interesting commentary.
Yeah, you can't pretend. You don't have the data to pretend you're making a realistic. I've not seen that movie actually. I need to, but I knew we were doing this, and as soon as I know we're doing a subject, I like shut down all information gathering about that person.
Very good. Right. Yeah. Art of Darkness, stunting Brad Kelly's intellectual growth since 2021.
Right.
That's our goal. No, not at all. And so we'll talk a little more about the biopic Blonde on the After Dark. And my better half may join us briefly for a story on the After Dark if the children behave. So gonna be a fun one. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod for the extra content. But you know how we do. We're gonna go in hard now and tell you the story, or a story, about the life of Marilyn Monroe. So again, the source material is my story. The authorship and authenticity of which is somewhat dubious. My impression of it is that it's pretty authentic. It's based on interviews with her. But just know that it ends abruptly, and it only comes up to a certain point in her life. And then the remainder is going to be a lot of Wikipedia. But I'll weave it in a way that I think is hopefully satisfying. All right. Ready?
Ready.
You ready to rock?
Ready to go.
Do it. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926 at the LA General Hospital in LA, California. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, née Monroe, who was born in 1902 and lived to 1984, was born in Piedras Negras, Chihuahua, Mexico, to a poor Midwestern family who migrated to California at the turn of the century. Can you see the dust? Can you see the tumbleweeds? Imagine you're leaving the Midwest for California at the turn of the century. That is intense.
In a a wagon train or something.
Maybe they took the train, probably not. I don't know if the train had been finished by then. We'd have to look it up. But in any case, I think they probably had a train. But in any case, pretty early. Now, let me get this right. At age 15, we're still talking about her mother. Gladys married John Newton Baker, an abusive man 9 years her senior. She got married at 15. This is going to be a repeated theme with Marilyn herself. They had 2 children, Robert and Bernice. She successfully filed for divorce and got custody in 1923. But Baker kidnapped the children soon after and moved them home to his native Kentucky.
Wow.
Woo!
Wow.
So mom's coming into this with some baggage that's heavy. And this is not like hopping on a coach flight to from LAX to whatever airport in Kentucky to go see your fam. You might as well be in a different planet.
Yeah.
This is out of order slightly, but Monroe was not told she had a sister until she was 12, and they only met when Monroe was 17 or 18 in 1944. All right. Following the divorce, Gladys worked as a film negative cutter at Consolidated Film Industries. So she's in the business in a small way. In 1924, she married Martin Edward Mortensen, but they separated just months later and divorced in 1928. So they got separated. The marriage stuck. But in 2022, DNA testing indicated that Monroe's father was Charles Stanley Gifford, a co-worker of Gladys with whom she had an affair in 1925. So mom had an affair. Marilyn's the product of the affair, not the man she was married to at the time.
Interesting.
They only found that out in 2022.
Yeah.
Fun. This is what I'm talking about with this.
Yeah.
This is why the Wikipedia is like, I'm going to live and die by this because like it's so much. I mean, all through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, this book after book after book, constant reappraisals, constant rethinking what she was and what she means. It's wild. She's truly an icon. I think the only comparable actor we've covered would be Brando. She's with whom she had a relationship. Yeah. And by the way, Brad, if you've not, and anyone listening, if you've not seen Marilyn Monroe in a movie, you've got to watch Some Like It Hot.
Is that the one? Okay.
Oh yeah, Some Like It Hot is amazing. It's like an all-time great movie. Billy Wilder, Jack Lemmon, Marilyn's in it, Tony Curtis.
Okay.
I mean, it's just tremendous. It's hilarious. You don't know that movie at all?
I know the name of it. I've never seen it. Yeah.
Oh, it's so funny. I mean, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's you got to watch Some Like It Hot.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah, well, you got to cue it up after. I mean, here. So I'll just read from the IMDb real quick. This is a totally out of order, but I just think it's important. Right. Here's the log line. After two male musicians witness a mob hit, they flee the state in an all-female band disguised as women, but further complications set in. I mean, come on.
That's fun.
Come on.
Yeah.
Sold.
That's campy. Fun.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. It's great. Yeah. All right. So let's see here. Monroe also had two other half-siblings from Gifford's marriage with his first wife, a sister Doris, and a brother Charles. Although Gladys was mentally and financially unprepared for a child, Monroe's early childhood was stable and happy. Gladys placed her daughter with evangelical Christian foster parents Albert and Ida Bollender in the rural town of Hawthorne. She also lived there for 6 months until she was forced to move back to the city for employment. She then began visiting her daughter on weekends. In the summer of 1933, Gladys bought a small house in Hollywood with a loan and moved 7-year-old Monroe in with her. Now I'm going to start reading from my story. We're going to start to get Marilyn's voice here. Painting a picture, different time.
Yeah.
And this is Marilyn. I thought the people I lived with were my parents. I called them Mama and Dad. The woman said to me one day, "Don't call me Mama. You're old enough to know better. I'm not related to you in any way. You just bored here. Your mama's coming to see you tomorrow. You can call her Mama if you want to." I said, "Thank you." I didn't ask her about the man I called Dad. He was a letter carrier. I used to sit on the edge of the bathtub in the morning and watch him shave and ask him questions, which way was east or south, or how many people there were in the world. He was the only one who had ever answered any questions I asked. The people I had thought were my parents had children of their own. They weren't mean, they were just poor. They didn't have much to give anybody, even their own children, and there was nothing left over for me. I was 7. But I did my share of the work. I washed floors and dishes and ran errands. My mother called for me the next day. She was a pretty woman who never smiled. I'd seen her often before, but I hadn't known quite who she was. When I said, "Hello, Mama," this time she stared at me. She had never kissed me or held me in her arms or hardly spoken to me. I didn't know anything about her then, but a few years later I learned a number of things. When I think of her now, my heart hurts me twice as much as it used to when I was a little girl. It hurts me for both of us. My mother was married at 15. She had 2 children before me and worked in a movie studio as a film cutter. One day she came home earlier than usual and found her young husband making love to another woman. There was a big row, and her husband banged out of the flat. While my mother was crying over the collapse of her marriage, he sneaked back one day and kidnapped her 2 babies. My mother spent all her savings trying to get her children back. She hunted them for a long time. Finally, she traced them to Kentucky and hitchhiked to where they were. She was broke with hardly any strength left when she saw her children again. They were living in a fine house. Their father was married again and well off. She met with him but didn't ask him for anything, not even to kiss the children she had been hunting for so long. But like the mother in the movie Stella Dallas, she went away and left them to enjoy a happier life than she could give them. I think it was something beside being poor that made my mother leave like that. When she saw her 2 children laughing and playing in a fine house among happy people, she must have remembered how different it had been for her as a child. Her father had been taken away to die in a mental hospital in Patton, and her grandmother had also been taken off to the mental hospital in Norwalk to die there screaming and crazy. And her brother had killed himself, and there were other family ghosts. So my mother came back to Hollywood without her 2 children and went to work as a film cutter again. I wasn't born yet. The day my mother called for me at the letter carrier's house and took me to her rooms for a visit was the first happy day in my life that I remember. I had visited my mother before, being sick and unable to take care of me and keep a job too. She paid the letter carrier $5 a week to give me a home. Every once in a while, she brought me to her rooms for a visit. I used to be frightened when I visited her and spent most of my time in the closet of her bedroom hiding among her clothes. She seldom spoke to me except to say, "Don't make so much noise, Norma." She would say this even when I was lying in bed at night and turning the pages of a book. Even the sound of a page turning made her nervous. There was one object in my mother's room that always fascinated me. It was a photograph on the wall. There were no other pictures on the walls, just this one framed photograph. Whenever I visited my mother, I would stand looking at this photograph and hold my breath for fear she would order me to stop looking. I had found out that people always ordered me to stop doing things I like to do. This time my mother caught me staring at the photograph, but didn't scold me. Instead, she lifted me up in a chair so I could see it better. "That's your father," she said. I felt so excited I almost fell off the chair. It felt so good to have a father, to be able to look at his picture and know I belonged to him. And what a wonderful photograph it was. He wore a slouch hat, a little gaily on the side. There was a lively smile in his eyes, and he had a thin mustache like Clark Gable. I felt very warm toward the picture. My mother said, "He was killed in an auto accident in New York City." I believed everything people told me in that time, but I didn't believe this. I didn't believe he was run over and dead. I asked my mother what his name was. She wouldn't answer, but went into the bedroom and locked herself in. Years later, I found out what his name was and many other things about him, how he used to live in the same apartment building where my mother lived and how they fell in love and how he walked off and left her while I was getting born without ever seeing me. The strange thing was that everything I heard about him made me feel warmer toward him. The night I met his picture, I dreamed of it when I fell asleep, and I dreamed of it 1,000 times after. So when I said it's a Dickensian story, I wasn't LARPing.
Yeah.
At all.
Wow.
Pretty heavy. Yeah. This book is a gem.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So yeah, I've got more from her. This is from the same chapter. So this is when she gets a piano arrives and there's a grand piano. She's a boarder. Yeah. She has a room of her own. And let's see here. I want to read this. My mother found another couple to keep me. They were English people who needed the $5 a week that went with me. She's basically being rented out as a servant. Also, I was large for my age and could do a lot of work. One day, my mother, and that her precocious growth would be a big, big factor. She looked like a grown woman when she was 12. And you have to remember the period. She was a early bloomer. Let's just say that diplomatically, right? One day, my mother came to call. I was in the kitchen washing dishes. She stood looking at me without talking. When I turned around, I saw there were tears in her eyes, and I was surprised. "I'm going to build a house for you and me to live in," she said. "It's going to be painted white and have a backyard." And she went away. It was true. My mother managed it somehow, out of savings and a loan. She built a house. The English couple and I were both taken to see it. It was small and empty, but beautiful, and it was painted white. The 4 of us moved in. I had a room to myself. The English couple didn't have to pay rent, just take care of me as they had done before. I worked hard, but it didn't matter. It was my first home. My mother brought furniture, a table with a white top and brown legs, chairs, beds in it, and curtains. I heard her say, It's all on time, but don't worry. I'm working double shift at the studio, and I'll soon be able to pay it off. One day, a grand piano arrived at my home. It was out of condition. My mother had bought it secondhand. It was for me. I was going to give piano lessons on it, to be given piano lessons on it. It was a very important piano, despite being a little banged up. It had belonged to the movie star Frederick March. You'll play the piano over here by the windows, my mother said. And here, on each side of the fireplace, there'll be a love seat, and we can sit listening to you. As soon as I pay off a few other things, I'll get the love seats, and we'll all sit in them at night and listen to you play the piano. But the 2 love seats were not to be. One morning, the English couple and I were having breakfast in the kitchen. It was early. Suddenly, there was a terrible noise on the stairway outside the kitchen. It was the most frightening noise I'd ever heard. Bangs and thuds kept on as if they would never stop. Something's falling down the stairs, I said. The Englishwoman held me from going to see. Her husband went out and after a time came back into the kitchen. I've sent for the police and the ambulance, he said. I asked if it was my mother. Yes, he said, but you can't see her. I stayed in the kitchen and heard people come and try to take my mother away. Nobody wanted me to see her. Everyone said, just stay in the kitchen like a good girl. She's all right, nothing serious. But I went out and looked in the hall. My mother was on her feet. She was screaming and laughing. They took her away to the Norwalk Mental Hospital. I knew the name of the hospital in a vague way. It was where my mother's father and grandmother had been taken when they started screaming and laughing. All the furniture disappeared. The white table, the chairs, the beds, and white curtains melted away, and the grand piano, too. The English couple disappeared also, and I was taken from the newly painted house to an orphan asylum and given a blue dress and a white shirtwaist to wear and shoes with heavy soles. And for a long time when I lay in bed at night, I could no longer daydream about anything. I kept hearing the terrible noise on the stairs and my mother's screaming and laughing as they led her out of the home she had tried to build for me. I never forgot the white painted house and its furniture. She talks about now how years later when she makes it, she gets the same piano and we bring it into her house in Hollywood.
Like the actual same
She found the
object.
same. Yeah, she found it in an old auction and would later bring it in. Yeah.
Wow. Laughing and screaming.
Artofdarkpod.com, the podcast about the dark side of creativity. We don't have to go looking on this episode.
No. Wow.
Yeah. I really can't think of an introduction that we've done yet that really goes harder than that.
No.
And this is a lot of this stuff is stuff that I didn't know. You sort of sense it somehow.
I didn't know. Yeah. I didn't know all of this. Yeah. I mean, I know there's I knew the darkness for sure. And like I said, humble beginnings, but I didn't realize she's.
Yeah. This is beyond humble.
Out of another century.
Yeah. This is not mom and dad at home. Dad drinks. Maybe he gets a little slappy sometimes. No, this is like Dickensian. Yeah. That's the word for it. Yeah. Orphanage.
Wow.
All right. So going back, they shared the house with lodgers, actors George and Maud Atkinson and their daughter Nellie. In January of 1934, Gladys had a mental breakdown and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. That's not a pleasant kind of schizophrenia.
No, that's not one of the better schizophrenias.
Right. We're not pro schizophrenia on this pod, but the paranoid kind, that's a little bit, yikes. After several months in a rest home, she was committed to the Metropolitan State Hospital. She spent the rest of her life in and out of hospitals and was rarely in contact with Monroe. And she wasn't named Marilyn Monroe at this point. She's still Norma Jean. Monroe became a ward of the state, and her mother's friend, Grace Goddard, took responsibility over her and her mother's affairs.
You never want to hear ward of the state. That's never good. That's never been good.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah.
The DMV runs your life now.
Right. Right.
Here's a ticket.
Yeah.
Yep. Here are your heavy, clunky shoes. Here is your cot.
Yeah.
The state of California is your mother now.
Right. Oh my God. Okay.
Yikes. What an incredible story. Knowing where we're going from here.
Yeah, I
incredible.
mean, she first name basis and much else beside with the president, right? I mean,
Incredible.
Yeah,
An incredible story. Yeah.
yeah.
Over the next 4 years, Monroe's living situation changed often. For the first 16 months, she continued living with the Atkinsons and may have been sexually abused during this time. Always a shy girl, she now also developed a stutter and became withdrawn. In the summer of 35, she briefly stayed with Grace and her husband, Irwin Doc Goddard, and 2 other families. So she's kind of going in and out of foster care and orphanages. I want to read something about her sort of her attitudes towards sex at this point. And she had an absolute thing for Clark Gable from a very young age, which is quite amusing or interesting because like near the end of her life, she was in the Misfits with Clark Gable.
Clark Gable.
Yeah. So very kind of interesting. Right. She mentions him here. Let me see. As I grew older, I knew I was different from other children because there were no kisses or promises in my life. I often felt lonely and wanted to die. I would try to cheer myself up with daydreams. I never dreamed of anyone loving me as I saw other children loved. That was too big a stretch for my imagination. I compromised by dreaming of my attracting someone's attention, besides God, of having people look at me and say my name. This wish for attention had something to do, I think, with my trouble in church on Sundays. No sooner was I in the pew with the organ playing and everybody singing a hymn than the impulse would come to me to take off all my clothes. I wanted desperately to stand up naked for God and everyone else to see. I had to clench my teeth and sit on my hands to keep myself from undressing. Sometimes I had to pray hard and beg God to stop me from taking my clothes off. I even had dreams about it. In the dream, I entered the church wearing a hoop skirt with nothing under it. The people would be lying on their backs in the church aisle, and I would step over them, and they would look up at me. My impulse to appear naked in my dreams about it had no shame or sense of sin in them. Dreaming of people looking at me made me feel less lonely. I think I wanted them to see me naked because I was ashamed of the clothes I wore, the never-changing faded blue dress of poverty. Naked, I was like the other girls and not someone in an orphan's uniform. Yeah. When my mother was taken to that's a story. I'll go on. When my mother was taken to the hospital, Aunt Grace became my legal guardian. I could hear her friends arguing in her room at night when I lay in bed pretending to be asleep. They advised against her adopting me because I was certain to become more and more of a responsibility as I grew older. This was on account of my heritage, they said, the mental illness. They talked about my mother and her father and brother and grandmother all being mental cases and said I would certainly follow in their footsteps. I lay in bed shivering as I listened. I didn't know what a mental case was, but I knew it wasn't anything good. And I held my breath waiting to hear whether Aunt Grace would let me become a state orphan or adopt me as her own. After a few evenings of argument, Aunt Grace adopted me, heritage and all, and I fell asleep happy. And then it goes on. She lived as an orphan on and off. Most of the time she was placed with a family who were given $5 a week, 9 different families before she was able to quit being a legal orphan. And the way that she did it, we'll come to because it's interesting. All right, here we go.
Okay.
In September of 1935, Grace placed her at the LA Orphans Home. The orphanage was a model institution and was described in positive terms by her peers, but Monroe felt abandoned. Of course you would. Of course you would.
Yeah.
I mean, just terrible. I mean, this is like Annie.
How would you not? I mean, she was abandoned.
Yeah, 9 years old. Yeah,
yeah, of course.
Encouraged by the orphanage staff who thought that Monroe would be happier living in a family, Grace became her legal guardian in 36, but did not take her out of the orphanage until the summer of 37. Then this happens.
37. She's 11 years old-ish?
11 years old, yeah. Let me just make sure I have the right business. She's talking about daydreaming. She would daydream an awful lot. Mm-hmm. Oh, and this is about her first little like childhood fling. And And I'll get to her opinions about sex and stuff. She had a very interesting attitude towards sex. I mean, she didn't really finally fall in love until quite a lot later. But she writes or spoke very eloquently about the nature of men, the nature of women, her own sexuality. So we'll get to it. I have to just sort of pause and say, because we're coming to it. Can you imagine being Marilyn Monroe in LA at this period and then being like 12 or 13 years old and everything changes around you because of your looks? She described it happening like overnight. She went from being, and we'll get to it, from being just like an outcast to like boys like stalking her home overnight. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Just trying to paint
that'll give you some insights into men and women too, though. Really. I mean, it's easy to just experiencing that. You learn something that might not be able to be learned any other way.
Right. She's still a child here, though. So I never daydreamed about love, even after I fell in love the first time. This was when I was around 8. I fell in love with a boy named George, who was a year older. We used to hide in the grass together until he got frightened and jumped up and ran away. What we did in the grass never frightened me. I knew it was wrong, or I wouldn't have hidden, but I didn't know what was wrong. At night, I lay awake and tried to figure out what sex was and what love was. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but there was no one to ask. Besides, I knew that people only told lies to children, lies about everything from soup to Santa Claus. Then one day I found out about sex without asking any questions. I was almost 9, and I lived with my family that rented a room to a man named Kimmel. He was a stern-looking man, and everyone respected him and called him Mr. Kimmel. He was passing his room when his door opened, and he said quietly, or I was passing his room when his door opened, and he said quietly, "Please come in here, Norma." I thought he wanted me to run an errand. "Where do you want me to go, Mr. Kimmel?" I asked. "No place," he said, and closed the door behind me. He smiled at me and turned the key in the lock. "Now you can't get out," he said, as if we were playing a game. I stood staring at him. I was frightened, but I didn't dare yell. I knew if I yelled, I would be sent back to the orphanage in disgrace again. Mr. Kimmel knew this too. When he put his arms around me, I kicked and fought as hard as I could, but I didn't make a sound. He was stronger than I was and wouldn't let me go. He kept whispering to me to be a good girl. When he unlocked the door and let me out, I ran to tell my aunt what Mr. Kimmel had done. "I want to tell you something," I stammered, "about Mr. Kimmel. My aunt interrupted. "Don't you dare say anything against Mr. Kimmel. Mr. Kimmel's a fine man. He's my star boarder." Mr. Kimmel came out of his room and stood in the doorway, smiling. "Shame on you." My aunt glared at me, complaining about people. "This is different," I began. "This is something I have to tell. Mr. Kimmel," I started stammering again and couldn't finish. Mr. Kimmel came up to me and handed me a nickel. "Go buy yourself some ice cream," he said. I threw the nickel in Mr. Kimmel's face and ran out. I cried in bed that night and wanted to die. I thought, if there's nobody ever on my side that I can talk to, I'll start screaming. But I didn't scream. A week later, the family, including Mr. Kimmel, went to a religious revival meeting in a tent. My aunt insisted I come along. The tent was jammed. Everybody was listening to the evangelist. He was half singing and half talking about the sinfulness of the world. Suddenly, he called on all the sinners in the tent to come up to the altar of God where he stood and repent. I rushed up ahead of everyone else and started telling about my sin. "On your knees, sister," he said to me. I fell on my knees and began to tell about Mr. Kimmel and how he had molested me in his room. But other sinners crowded around me. They also fell on their knees and started wailing about their sins and drowned me out. I looked back and saw Mr. Kimmel standing among the non-sinners, praying loudly and devoutly for God to forgive the sins of others.
Jeez.
Ooh. Gee, playing all the hits here.
Yeah. Mr.
Rough.
Kimmel. Well,
not a
feed
good
him to the wood
scene.
chipper.
Yeah, wood chipper. Yeah, go burr. Wood chipper, go burr. So here we go. Monroe's second stay with the Goddards lasted only a few months because Doc molested her. So now this is where it's like, was it Doc or was it Kimmel?
Right.
Like, is it like, what is this? But in any case, something happened.
Yeah.
She then lived for brief periods with her relatives and Grace's friends and relatives in LA and Compton. Monroe's childhood experiences first made her want to become an actress. You could see this, right? She wants to be seen. And this is her saying, I didn't like the world around me because it was grim. Yeah, you think? When I heard that this was acting, I said, that's what I want to be. Some of my foster families used to send me to the movies to get me out of the house. And there I'd sit all day and way into the night up in front there with the screen so big, a little kid all alone. And I loved it. You can see why she wants to escape into this fantasy.
Yeah, for sure.
Monroe found a more permanent home in September of 1938 when she began living with Grace's aunt, Anna Lauer, in the West Side district of Sawtell. And now I've got a little more here. And now we're getting to her puberty. At 12, I looked like a girl of 17. My body was developed and shapely, but no one knew this but me. I still wore the blue dress and the blouse the orphanage provided. They made me look like an overgrown lummox. I had no money. The other girls rode to school in a bus. I had no nickel to pay for the ride. Rain or shine, I walked the 2 miles from my aunt's home to the school. I hated the walk. I hated the school. I had no friends. The people seldom talked to me and never wanted me in their games. Nobody ever walked home with me or invited me to visit their homes. This was partly because I came from the poor part of the district where all the Mexicans and Japanese lived. It was also because I couldn't smile at anyone. Once, a shoemaker standing in the doorway of his shop stopped me as I was walking to school. What's your name? He asked me. Norma, I said. What's your last name? He asked. I wouldn't give him the name I had, Norma Mortensen, because it wasn't the name of the man with the slouch hat and the gable mustache. I didn't answer. You're a queer kid, the shoemaker said. I watch you pass here every day, and I've never seen you smile. You'll never get anywhere like that. I went on to school, hating the shoemaker. In school, the pupils often whispered about me and giggled as they stared at me. They called me dumb and made fun of my orphan's outfit. I didn't mind being thought dumb. I knew I wasn't. One morning, both my white blouses were torn, and I would be late for school if I stopped to fix them. I asked one of my sisters, air quotes, in the house if she could loan me something to wear. She was my age, but smaller. She loaned me a sweater. I arrived at school just as the math class was starting. As I walked to my seat, everybody stared at me as if I had suddenly grown 2 heads, which in a way I had. They were under my tight sweater.
Oh, boy.
At
yeah.
recess, a half dozen boys crowded around me. Geez, little subtlety, guys. They made jokes and kept looking at my sweater as if it were a gold mine. I had known for some time that I had shapely breasts and thought nothing of the fact. The math class, however, was more impressed. After school, 4 boys walked home with me, wheeling their bicycles by hand. I was excited, but acted as if nothing unusual was happening. The next week, the shoemaker stopped me again. I see you've taken my advice, he said. You'll find you get along much better if you smile at folks. I noticed that he also looked at my sweater as he talked. I hadn't given it back to my sister yet. The school and the day became different after that. Girls who had brothers began inviting me to their homes, and I met their folks too. And there were always 4 or 5 boys hanging around my house. We played games in the street and stood around talking under the trees until supper time. A little more here because this is so important. I wasn't aware of anything sexual in their new liking for me, and there were no sex thoughts in my mind. I didn't think of my body as having anything to do with sex. It was more like a friend who had mysteriously appeared in my life, a sort of magic friend. Just gets to play life on with a cheat code for a minute, right? You know, hey, good for her. Yeah. A few weeks later, I stood in front of a mirror one morning and put lipstick on my lips. I darkened my blonde eyebrows. I had no money for clothes, and I had no clothes except my orphan rig and the lone sweater. The lipstick and the mascara were like clothes, however. I saw that they improved my looks as much as if I had put on a real gown. My arrival in school with painted lips and darkened brows and still encased in the magic sweater started everybody buzzing. And the buzzing was not all friendly. All sorts of girls, not only 13-year-olds, but seniors of 17 and 18 set up shop as my enemies. They told each other and whoever would listen that I was a drunkard and spent my nights sleeping with boys on the beach. The scandals were lies. I didn't drink. and I didn't let any boys take liberties, and I had never been on any beach in my life. But I couldn't feel angry with the scandal makers, girls being jealous of me, girls frightened of losing their boyfriends because I was more attractive. These were no longer daydreams made up to hide lonely hours. They were truths. And by summertime, I had a real beau. He was 21.
Oh my gosh.
All right. I could hear you. Yeah, that's an age gap. Yeah. Disavow.
Yeah.
And despite being very...
How old is she?
She was 13.
Oh, good God.
I'm getting to it. Yeah. And despite being very sophisticated, he thought I was 18 instead of 13. I was able to fool him by keeping my mouth shut and walking a little fancy. Since taking the math... okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know how old she is, but she walks pretty fancy. So
the court is gonna love that. The judge is gonna, Your Honor.
Right.
She was walking a little fancy.
Right.
Yeah. Tiny, with whom you share a cell at San Quentin. Yeah, she was walking fancy, Tiny.
Yeah.
Yes, that's hilarious. Since taking the math class by storm a few months ago, I had practiced walking languorously. What a word.
Yeah.
My sophisticated beau arrived at my home one Saturday with the news that we were going swimming. I rushed into my sister's room, the one who was a little smaller than me, she knows, to borrow a bathing suit. Standing in front of the bureau mirror, I spent an hour putting it on and practicing walking in it. So they go. It was a sunny day, and the sand was crowded with bathers and with mothers and their children. Despite being born and raised only a few miles from the ocean, I had never seen it up close before. I stood and stared for a long time. It was like something in a dream, full of gold and lavender colors, blue and foaming white. And there was a holiday feeling in the air that surprised me. Everybody seemed to be smiling at the sky. Come on, let's get in, my beau commanded. In where? I asked. In the water, he laughed. I thought of my tight bathing suit. The idea of hiding myself in the water while wearing it seemed to me ridiculous, but I said nothing. I stood watching the girls and women and felt a little disappointed. I hadn't expected that half the feminine population of LA would be parading the sands with almost nothing on. I thought I'd be the only one. My beau was getting impatient again, so I removed my slacks and sweater and stood in my skimpy suit. I thought, I'm almost naked. And I closed my eyes and stood still. My sophisticated boyfriend had stopped nagging me. I started walking slowly across the sand. I went almost to the water's edge and then walked down the beach. The same thing happened that had happened in math class, but on a larger scale. It was also much noisier. Young men whistled at me. Some jumped up from the sand and trotted up for a better view. Even the women stopped moving as I came near. I paid no attention to the whistles and whoops. In fact, I didn't hear them. I was full of a strange feeling, as if I were two people. One of them was Norma Jean from the orphanage, who belonged to nobody. The other was someone whose name I didn't know, but I knew where she belonged. She belonged to the ocean and the sky and the whole world.
Whoa.
Woo! Whoa, doggy. Getting going.
Yeah.
She's coming into her own, I think is what we would say.
Yeah. A couple things there. One, nobody ever took this kid to the friggin' beach?
This is what I mean about this.
Like,
this is
what?
Dickensian, and they're poor.
It's like right down the street, and nobody. Oh my god.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I mean, LA's a big town. I mean,
It is.
she was over in Compton. I mean, that's not.
No, that's true. But
even today, that's like 45 minutes or an hour. It depends on traffic and everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know,
Jeez.
these people don't have cars.
Right.
She can't even afford the bus.
Right. Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe they took her when she was a lot younger and she just didn't remember. But I mean, you know.
Yeah. Are we going to call this episode Marilyn Monroe Straight Outta Compton?
We might have to. That's awesome. That's a good title. Very good. Maybe we'll come up with something better, but I don't know if we will. I can't guarantee it. What were we yucking about 5 minutes ago? We were
the fact that the 21-year-old boyfriend
walking
and a
fancy
girl walking fancy. Yeah, that one's pretty good.
Yeah, that's I like Straight Outta Compton. All right, pressing on. She was enrolled at Emerson Junior High School and went to weekly Christian Science services with Lauer. She excelled in writing and contributed to the school newspaper, but was otherwise a mediocre student. Owing to the elderly Lauer's health problems, Monroe returned to live with the Goddards in Van Nuys in about early 1941. The same year, she began attending Van Nuys High School. Now we're into like wartime, right?
Yeah.
In 1942, the company that employed Doc Goddard relocated him to West Virginia. California child protection laws prevented the Goddards from taking Monroe out of state, and she faced having to return to the orphanage. Can you imagine having to like go into an orphanage like while you're in high school?
Right.
You're living.
Right.
Oh, it's just terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. 'Cause she's 15 or 16. Yeah.
She's 16. So let's see here. But she's talking about what happened after all these events. But instead of learning anything, I grew more and more confused. So did the school. It had no way of coping with a 13-year-old siren. Why I was a siren, I hadn't the faintest idea. There were no thoughts of sex in my head. I didn't want to be kissed, and I didn't dream about being seduced by a duke or a movie star. The truth was that with all my lipstick and mascara and precocious curves, I was as unsensual as a fossil. But I seemed to affect people quite otherwise. The boys took to wooing me as if I were the sole member of my sex in the district. Being boys, most of them were satisfied with a goodnight kiss or a confused hug in a hallway. I was able, in fact, to stand off most of the spooners entirely. Boys from 15 to 18 are not very persistent lovemakers. I imagine that if it weren't for older women seducing them, they would remain virginal just as long as girls do, if they do. Among my suitors, however, were young men who went in for major wrestling, and now and then a bona fide wolf with a complete line of dialogue and a full set of plans. These were the easiest to duck because I didn't feel sorry for them. The truth is, I never felt offended by any of them, even the wrestlers who mussed my hair. If anything, I envied them. I would have liked to want something as much as they did. I wanted nothing. They might as well have been wooing a bear in a log. My admirers all said the same thing in a different way. It was my fault they're wanting to kiss and hug me. Some said it was the way I looked at them with eyes full of passion. Others said it was my voice that lured them on. Still others said I gave off vibrations that floored them. That's a great line. I always felt they were talking about somebody else, not me. It was like being told they were attracted to me because of my diamonds and rubies. I not only had no passion in me, I didn't even know what it meant. I decided finally that the boys came after me because I was an orphan and had no parents to protect me or frighten them off. This decision made me cooler than ever to get my train of admirers. But neither coolness nor disdain nor get out of here, don't bother me. I have no interest whatsoever in kissing with my lips open. None of my frozen attitudes changed the picture. The boys continued to come after me as if I were a vampire with a rose in my teeth. The girl pupils were another problem, but one I could understand. They disliked me more and more as I grew older. Now, instead of being accused of stealing combs, nickels, or necklaces, I was accused of stealing young men. Aunt Grace suggested a solution for my troubles. You ought to get married, she said. I'm too young. I was still 15. I don't think you are, Aunt Grace laughed. But there's nobody wants to marry me, I said. Yes, there is, she said. Who? I asked. Jim, she said. Jim was Mr. Dougherty. He lived near me. He was good-looking, polite, and full-grown. But Jim is stuck on my sister, I told her. It was you he took to the football game, Aunt Grace said, not her. It was awful boring, I said. He's like the others, except he's taller and more polite. That's a fine quality in a man, said Aunt Grace, politeness. The aunt and uncle with whom I was living, and these are aunt and uncle in air quotes, by the way, my ninth set of relatives helped me make up my mind. They were going to move. This meant I'd have to go back and live in the orphanage till they unloaded me on another family. I married Jim Dougherty.
Wow.
It was like being retired to a zoo. The first effect marriage had on me was to increase my lack of interest in sex. My husband either didn't mind this or wasn't aware of it. We were both too young to discuss such an embarrassing topic openly. Actually, our marriage was a sort of friendship with sexual privileges. I found out later that marriages are often no more than that, and that husbands are chiefly good as lovers when they are betraying their wives. No comment. Jim's folks didn't care much for me, for which I couldn't blame them. I was a peculiar wife. I disliked grown-ups. Now listen to this. I preferred washing dishes to sitting and talking to them. As soon as they started playing cards or having arguments, I would sneak out of the house and join the kids in the street. I liked boys and girls younger than me. I played games with them until my husband came out and started calling me to go to bed.
Right. She's literally a child.
She's a child.
I mean, physically, yeah, not, yeah.
Wow. I've got a couple more pairs about this. My marriage brought me neither happiness nor pain. My husband and I hardly spoke to each other. This wasn't because we were angry. We had nothing to say. I've seen many married couples since that were just like me and Jim. They were usually more enduring kind of marriages, the ones that were pickled in silence. The most important thing my marriage did for me was to end forever my status as an orphan. I felt grateful to Jim for this. He was the Lochinvar who had rescued me from my blue dress and white blouse. My various advisors had been right about marriage putting an end to my popularity as a siren. The boys did not come after Mrs. Dougherty. The rose seemed to have fallen out of her teeth.
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah. Goodness. She
16
just turned
old.
16. Just turned 16. Yeah.
What is even, I mean, I guess that's technically even legal now in most places, isn't it? I don't even know.
It depends. It varies state by state.
Yeah.
I think it is. And I think a lot of the times it's understood to be like a marriage of convenience. It's almost like a kind of an acquiescence to the balancing act between abortion. People are trying to figure it's truly a bizarre thought to think about Marilyn Monroe going out to play with the kids.
Right.
Well, she's like fully married.
Yeah.
And it's this
buxom, adult looking, but not,
literally
really...
Mrs. Dougherty. Yeah. Brad, I'm going to use the restroom real quick. Do you want to tell me where you're at with Marilyn right now and then tease the book club? Yeah.
Sure. I clicked on a link for Jim Dougherty, just curious, like, what's this guy's deal? Apparently he was the first SWAT trainer in the United States, like SWAT teams. Just interesting fact. So while Kevin's stepping out for a second, book ends reading club April 16th, 4 p.m. Eastern. Yes, 4 p.m. Eastern. We're meeting and discussing Ficciones or Fictions by Jorge Luis Borges. So if you were hearing this before then and you want to get in on that, that's patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Really looking forward to this. It's a landmark collection, kind of double collection almost, of short stories. If it's a little bit confusing, what you're looking for is the stories collected under Garden of Fork and Paths and Artifices, put together in one book called Fictions or Ficciones. Won a huge book award in Argentina in the in the 1940s, and is an amazing piece of literature, and I can't wait to talk with you about it.
Yeah, and if you want more details about the book club, go to artofdarkpod.com/book-club, or just go to artofdarkpod.com. You cannot miss it. And let's just pause to say we love hearing from people. Brad mans the Twitter, doing a fabulous job on the Bird website at artofdarkpod. We also have a very active Telegram with lots of colorful characters. You never know. It seems like the Telegram just rotates around pens and frequently comes back to high quality pens as an anchor, which is it feels right. Yeah. And that's at t.me/artofdarkpod. It's a
smart, interesting, friendly group of people,
Yeah. Cool. Let me plug one personal thing. I just finished a new play. We did a reading of my new play. It is online. If you go to badmouthtc.com and you look for the podcast, it's called The Animals. And it's quite intense. So go and check that out too.
I still have to check that out. You just dropped that a few days ago.
Just dropped it like a week ago. So please indulge me. I want to share this. This is something I wrote. I'm very proud of it. And stick around at least until the second act to hear the anarchist parrot. Yeah. And this would be a great play for Marilyn to be in. If Marilyn was still around and young and kicking, I would cast Marilyn. Maybe not. She's maybe not the right, but I wouldn't say no. All right, back to Marilyn. So let's see. Yes, as a solution, she married their neighbor's 21-year-old son, factory worker James Dougherty. Now, are you sure this is the same James Dougherty?
Apparently,
like a SWAT trainer.
I clicked on the link.
What? Are you sure?
He's an American police officer, the first trainer of special weapons and tactics, which is what SWAT stands for, and he's best known as the first husband of Marilyn Monroe.
I did not know this. Well, you just you trumped me here.
I mean, I think that happened much after they were together, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Well, he probably had some sort of like mental issue about marrying this incredible bombshell. He was probably thinking of ways to protect her from the neighborhood boys. So like the SWAT tactics came to him one night in a dream.
Fever dream and just woke up.
I am way out of my depth here. I am way out of my league.
I need some guns.
How do I need some guns? It does track, doesn't it? That does track. Yeah, he's like the Italian plumber. You got to go rescue the princess, man. 100%. Yeah, very interesting story. Okay, maybe we'll pause. We'll come back to James Dougherty a little bit later. Okay. All right. Monroe subsequently dropped out of high school and became a housewife. She found herself and Dougherty mismatched and later said she was dying of boredom during the marriage. In 1943, Dougherty enlisted in the Merchant Marine and was stationed in Santa Catalina Island, where Monroe moved with him. You're getting into the thick of the war here. In April of 1944, Dougherty was shipped out to the Pacific, where he remained for most of the next 2 years. Monroe moved in with her in-laws and began a job at the Radio Plane Company, a munitions factory in Van Nuys. So she's doing a little bit of Rosie the Riveter here. All right, I'm going to read from my story. Jim joined the Merchant Marine in 1944, and I went to work at a parachute factory. The Great War was on. Battles were being fought. Jukeboxes were playing. People's eyes were lit up. I wore overalls in the factory. I was surprised that they insisted on this. Putting a girl in overalls is like having her work in tights, particularly if a girl knows how to wear them. As parachute inspector, I was back in math class again. The men buzzed around me just as the high school boys had done. I have noticed since that men usually leave married women alone and are inclined to treat all wives with respect. This is no great credit to married women. Men are always ready to respect anything that bores them. The reason most wives, even pretty ones, wear such a dull look is because they're respected too much. Maybe it was my fault that the men in the factory tried to date me and buy me drinks. I didn't feel like a married woman. I was completely faithful to my overseas husband, but that wasn't because I loved him or even because I had moral ideas. My fidelity was due to my lack of interest in sex. Jim finally came home, and we lived together again. It's hard to remember what you said, did, or felt when you were bored. Jim was a nice husband. He never hurt me or upset me, except on one subject. He wanted a baby. The thought of having a baby stood my hair on end. I could see it only as myself, another Norma Jean in an orphanage. Something would happen to me. Jim would wander off, and there would be this little girl in the blue and white dress, blouse, living in her aunt's home, washing dishes, being last in the bath water on Saturday night. That was a story I skipped over earlier, but she would talk about how she's living with like a family with like 6 or 7 kids, and they couldn't afford water. She would get the last of the bath water.
My God.
I mean, imagine that. Terrible.
Yeah. Well, and you can, I think, sympathize or empathize with this 16-year-old Marilyn not wanting to have a kid with her experience. She's not in passion. She's not in love with this. She's still a child. Like, for her to want to, I understand her, like, sort of revulsion to the idea at this juncture in her life.
Yeah, so it's just a marriage of convenience, the ultimate example of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this or you go back to an orphanage. All right. Yeah.
And she, and it's boring and it feels kind of entrapped, and it's better than an orphanage, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. I couldn't explain this to Jim. After he fell asleep beside me at night, I would lie awake crying. I didn't quite know who it was that cried, Mrs. Dougherty or the child she might have. It was neither. It was Norma Jean, still alive, still alone, still wishing she were dead. I feel different about having a child now. It's one of the things I dream of. She won't be any Norma Jean now, and I know how I'll bring her up, without lies. Nobody will tell her lies about anything, and I'll answer all her questions. If I don't know the answers, I'll go to an encyclopedia and look them up. I'll tell her whatever she wants to know about love, about sex, about everything, but chiefly no lies. No lies about there being a Santa Claus or about the world being full of noble and honorable people, all eager to help each other and do good to each other. I'll tell her there are honor and goodness in the world, the same as there are diamonds and radium. This is the end of my story of Norma Jean. Jim and I were divorced, and I moved into a room in Hollywood to live by myself. I was 19, and I wanted to find out who I was. When I just wrote, this is the end of Norma Jean, I blushed as if I'd been caught in a lie, because this sad, bitter child who grew up too fast is hardly ever out of my heart. With success all around me, I can still feel her frightened eyes looking out of mine. She keeps saying, I never lived, I was never loved. And often I get confused and think, it's I who am saying it.
Yeah.
Tough one, man. That tough childhoods.
Yeah.
You never get over it. You never get over it. Missing parents, abuse, sexual abuse. It stays with you forever. It's a haunting. It's a hauntology of like a real life haunting. It's like a person walking around with a ghost inside them somehow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jeez.
Yeah. Heavy. Well, where are you at right now with Marilyn, Brad? How you feeling?
Well, I'm kind of, her moving out on her own, I'm sort of mixed feelings, because on the one hand, it's like I'm having a little bit of you go girl, frankly, like, okay, let's go do it. You're 19 now, you've got a raw deal, and it seems like you're remaining optimistic and something's going to work out. And the other hand, I just imagine just this like vulnerable deer walking out onto the highway, just like, oh boy.
Yeah,
at least when you were married, that marriage might have sucked or whatever. It didn't even seem like it sucked. It was sort of just gray and bland, right? But like she said, at least people were respectful of her because she was Mrs. Now she's all on her own.
Right. And in LA.
Right.
And nobody sat her down and told her about the facts of life, or nobody's going to get her a job without strings attached.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. She's going to run headlong into the meat grinder that is Hollywood and then later fame. And you have to sort of ask, would it have been better for Marilyn if she had not achieved that? Like, it wouldn't have been better for us, but it's hard to say. You don't know. I think that's one of the key questions people sort of like, it's like, because she did achieve her dream of like being owned by the world. She belonged to the ocean and the skies and to the whole world. She got it.
Right.
And the world is not kind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the world is not kind. All right, let's keep on moving on. So that cough medicine, man. I might have to go get a little more cough medicine. I do this for you. I do this for you, Brad. I do it for our listeners. We really appreciate it. Please support the pod. Rain or shine, sleet or snow, cold medicine, coughs, we persevere on Art of Dark Pod.
Right.
Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. Help us make this a full-time job. It could take us 5 to 10 years, but I want to do this. I want to bring more episodes like this into your ears. So
Amen.
There you go. And also follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/@Art of Dark Pod. Okay, let's go. In late 1944, she met photographer David Conover, who had been sent by the U.S. Army Air Force's first motion picture unit to the factory to shoot morale-boosting pictures of female workers. Well, we're all going to pull together and look at all these dime pieces over here. Check out them gabs. We're gonna defeat the Nazis. Hitler. They don't have specimen like this over in Germany.
Yeah, none of those Krauts got cans like that.
Krauts got cans. Exactly. Yeah. Oh God.
I don't even know what a can is. Or a kraut, changes. Really.
I'm a kraut. You're looking at a kraut. Although none of her pictures were used, she quit working at the factory in January 1945 and began modeling for Conover and his friends.
Oh, and his friends.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
This is gonna get interesting. Defying her deployed husband, she moved on her own and signed a contract with the Blue Book Model Agency in August of 1945. Okay. The agency deemed Monroe's figure more suitable for pinup than high fashion modeling, and she was features that buxom, curvaceous, svelte. Yeah,
I guess that was even a thing then, huh? Fashion modeling is generally very
thin. Although I have no idea which way is up now. And she was featured mostly in advertisements and men's magazines. To make herself more employable, She straightened her hair and dyed it blonde. According to Emmeline Snively, the agency's owner, Monroe quickly became one of its most ambitious and hardworking models. By early 1946, she had appeared on 33 magazine covers for publications such as Pageant, U.S. Camera, Laugh, and Peak. As a model, Monroe occasionally used the pseudonym Jean Norman. I've got a little bit about the modeling here from her. Let's see. I want to make sure I get from to the right. This is about her desire to act. So here we go. And she's taking lessons now because she doesn't just want to model. She wants to be an actor. Acting was something golden and beautiful. It was like the bright colors Norma Jean used to see in her daydreams. It was an art. It was like a game you played that enabled you to step out of the dull world you knew into worlds so bright they made your heart leap just to think of them. When I was 8, I used to look out of the orphan asylum window at night and see a big lighted up sign that read RKO Radio Pictures. I hated the sign. It reminded me of the smell of glue. My mother had once taken me to the studio where she worked. The smell of the wet film she cut and spliced had stuck in my nose. That was Norma Jean's nose. Norma Dougherty, the aspiring actress, had no such feelings toward studio signs. To her, they were the beacons of a promised land, the land of Ingrid Bergman, Claudette Colbert, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Olivia de Havilland, Jean Tierney, Jennifer Jones. That's the way it was when I sat alone in my Hollywood room. I went to sleep hungry and I woke up hungry, and I thought all actors and actresses were geniuses sitting on the front porch of paradise. The movies. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So she's modeling. She's going to be a star. And by the way, and there are pictures in this book. I mean, there's never been a more beautiful woman than Marilyn Monroe. Full stop. She has, it just, there's no more beautiful woman. I mean, just, and there you go. That's my 2 cents. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, there's different. Equal and different, but
equal and different.
I would agree.
Yeah, you could see how she would be a force. It's sort of an amazing story. I mean, and then you have this sort of impression that she's the token dumb blonde, like a dumb, all the stupid dumb blonde jokes. You could sort of slot Marilyn, and she was not stupid.
No, that does not seem to be the case.
She was wicked sharp, and I mean, she ended up marrying Arthur Miller.
Right.
So
yeah.
In any case, all right, let's press on here. Through Snively, the agent at the leader of this agency, Monroe signed a contract with an acting agency in June of 46. And this, by the way, is at the height of the studio system. So this is where you're an actor, a studio will sign you, and you'll do like background work or extra work. You're on a contract for a certain amount. Right. Or they'll sign you if you're a star and you owe them 9 pictures or whatever it is. This is the studio system. After an unsuccessful interview at Paramount, she was given a screen test by Ben Lyon at 20th Century Fox. Head executive Daryl Zanuck was unenthusiastic about it, but he gave her a standard 6-month contract to avoid her being signed by rival RKO. So that's the kind of game we're playing here. Well, I don't know about this girl. She doesn't seem to have it, but we can't let them have her, kind of weird.
Does she have gams? What's a
right? She really contributed to the war effort with that. She posed for the.
I just men. Like all these old timey terms.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Gams. Monroe's contract began in August of 46, and she and Lyon selected the stage name Marilyn Monroe. The first name was picked by Lyon, who was reminded of Broadway star Marilyn Miller. The surname was Monroe's mother's maiden name. And I've got something about the name here from the book. I rushed to Aunt Gracie with the big news. I had a job. I could enter a studio without being asked 50 questions, and I didn't have to sit in a waiting room. I was on a payroll as an actress. It's the finest studio in the world, I said. 20th Century Fox. Aunt Grace beamed and went to the stove for coffee. The people are all wonderful, I said, and I'm going to be in a movie. It'll be a small part, but once I'm on the screen, you can just hear in the background the gears churning. We're going to feed her into this machine.
Right.
I stopped and looked at Aunt Grace. She was still smiling at me, but was standing still. Her face was pale and she looked tired, as if life was something too heavy to carry much further. I put my arms around her and helped her to the table. I'm all right, she said. The coffee will fix me up fine. It'll be different now for all of us, I said. I'll work hard. We sat a long time and discussed a new name for me. The casting director had suggested I think up some more glamorous name than Norma Dougherty. Yeah, good call. I'd like to oblige him, I said, especially since Dougherty isn't my name anymore anyway. Haven't you any ideas for a name? Aunt Grace asked. I didn't answer. I had a name, a real name that thrilled me whenever I thought of it. It belonged to the man with the slouch hat and the gable mustache. His photograph was now in my possession. I tried the name out in my mind, but kept silent. My aunt was smiling at me. I felt she knew what I was thinking. The man at the studio suggested Marilyn, I said. That's a nice name, my aunt said, and it fits with your mother's maiden name. I didn't know what that was. She was a Monroe, said Aunt Grace. Her family goes way back. I have some papers and letters I'm keeping for your mother. They show that she was related to President Monroe of the United States. You mean I'm related to a president of the United States? I asked. Directly descended, said Aunt Grace. I'm dubious. Let's just say that I'm dubious. This sounds like the kind of thing people in like a boarding house are saying, before they turn the lights out early to save money.
Right.
It's a wonderful name, I said. Marilyn Monroe. But I won't tell them about the president. I kissed Aunt Grace and said, I'll try to make good on my own. So I don't know, was Marilyn Monroe related to, President Monroe? I didn't even look it up, but that's the story of the name. Yeah. I'm going to look it up right now on the fly.
Right. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, it's never been proven. All right.
Sure.
Rumors. There you go. She was a fan of Abraham Lincoln. She was one of her heroes. She really identified with his childhood, which I think, that popular myth of Lincoln reading by candlelight and everything. Yeah, you can sort of see why she might be attached to that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. So now she's at a studio. In September of 1946, she divorces Dougherty because he opposed her career.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Now I've got quite a lot of reading from her about Hollywood. And this is some good stuff, man. Like, I had so much fun prepping this. I'm like, once I started getting into this book and getting into her voice and kind of being taken back, I'm like, this is so fascinating. And also, again, nothing changes. Like, human nature does not change. Whatever they tell you on Twitter, whatever whatever the mob says this week, human nature does not change.
Yeah.
So here we go. I've never read anything about Hollywood, the Hollywood I knew in those first years. No hint of it is ever in the movie fan magazines. If there are any books on the subject, I must have skipped them, along with the few million other books I haven't read. The Hollywood I knew was the Hollywood of failure. Nearly everybody I met suffered from malnutrition or suicide impulses. It was like the line in the poem, water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Fame, fame everywhere, but not a hello for us. We ate at drugstore counters. We sat in waiting rooms. We were the prettiest tribe of panhandlers that ever overran a town. And there were so many of us. Beauty contest winners, flashy college girls, homegrown sirens from every state in the Union, from cities and farms, from factories, vaudeville circuits, dramatic schools, and one from an orphan asylum. And around us were the wolves. Not the big wolves inside the studio gates, but the little ones. Talent agents without offices, press agents without clients, contact men without contacts, and managers. The drugstores and cheap cafes were full of managers ready to put you over if you enrolled under their banner. Their banner was usually a bed sheet. I met them all. Phoniness and failure were all over them. Some were vicious and crooked, but they were as near to the movies as you could get. So you sat with them, listening to their lies and schemes, and you saw Hollywood with their eyes, an overcrowded brothel, a merry-go-round with beds for horses. Among the phonies and failures were also a set of has-beens. These were mostly actors and actresses who had been dropped by the movies. Nobody knew why, least of all themselves. They had played big parts. They had scrapbooks full of stills and write-ups, and they were full of anecdotes about the big bosses with the magic names who ran the studios: Goldwyn, Zanuck, Meyer, Selznick, Schenck, Warren, Cohn. They had rubbed shoulders with them and exchanged conversations with them. Sitting in the cheap cafe nursing a glass of beer for an hour, they talked about the great ones, calling them by their first names. Sam said to me, and I told LB, and I'll never forget Daryl's excitement when he saw the rushes. When I remember this desperate lie-telling, dime-hunting Hollywood I knew only a few years ago, I get a little homesick. It was a more human place than the paradise I dreamed of and found. The people in it, the phonies and failures, were more colorful than the great men and successful artists I was soon to know. Even the crooks who threw me curves and set traps for me seemed pleasant, mellow characters. There was Harry, the photographer, who kept photographing me when he had enough money to buy plates for his view camera. I know a real hot agent, said Harry, who's crazy about you. He saw one of your stills and blew his top. And he's no alley runner. He used to be a big man in Budapest. What kind of a big man, Harry? Producer. You've heard of Reinhardt? Oh, yes. Well, he was next in line to Reinhardt, said Harry. You'll like him. He thinks big. Flim flam. I'm going to go on a little bit here because this is very, very good. But the one thing that I was not prepared for when I was doing Marilyn was how much like Bukowski, her story is in a way.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
right?
The dark side of La La Land. All right. The three of us sat in a cheap cafe the next evening. The proprietor knew better than to send the waiter over to see if we wanted anything. Too poor. Harry and I had been there before. The third at our table, Mr. Laszlo, didn't look any more promising as a customer. Mr. Laszlo was fat, unshaved, bald-headed, bleary-eyed, and his shirt collar was a little frayed, but he was a fine conversationalist. He spoke with a fascinating accent. It was hard to imagine that so cultured a man could be a bum, but I knew he was. Or what would he be doing with Harry and me? So you have ambition to be a great actress, said Mr. Laszlo. I nodded. Wonderful, said Mr. Laszlo. I'm just making up an accent. How would you like not only to be a big star, but also to own your own movie studio and make only the finest movies? No Hollywood junk, but art, real art. I'd like that, I said. Good, said Mr. Laszlo. Now I know where you stand. Wait till you hear his ideas, said Harry. I told you he thinks big. In Budapest. If I wanted a few $100s, I have only to telephone the bank and they send over a wagon with the money. He patted my hand. You are very beautiful. I would like to buy you the kind of dinner I used to have every night in Budapest. I've already eaten, I said. You are lucky, Mr. Laszlo sighed. But first, before I go, you are definitely interested in the project, may I ask? I haven't heard it yet. Are you willing to become my wife? Mr. Laszlo asked. Whose? I asked. The wife of a millionaire, said Mr. Laszlo. He has authorized me to ask you this question. Does he know me? He has studied your photographs, said Mr. Laszlo, and he has picked you out from 50 other girls. I didn't know I was in any contest, I said. No cracks, said Harry. This is high finance. The gentleman who wishes to marry you, said Mr. Laszlo, is 71 years of age. He has high blood pressure and no living relatives. He is alone in the world. He doesn't sound very enticing, I said. My dear child, Mr. Laszlo took my hand. His own was trembling with excitement. You will inherit everything in 6 months, maybe less. You mean he'll die if I marry him? I asked. I guarantee it, said Mr. Laszlo. That's like murder, I said to Harry. In 6 months, you will be a widow with $2 million, said Mr. Laszlo. You will keep the first million. Harry and I will split equally the second. I lay in bed unable to sleep that night. I would never marry or even see Mr. Laszlo's dying millionaire, but it was exciting to think about it. I went around for a week imagining myself living in a castle on a hill with a swimming pool and 100 bathing suits. Mr. Laszlo was one of the nicer of the scheme peddlers I met. There were a dozen not nearly as nice. Of these, Mr. Sylvester was one. I'm going to read about Mr. Sylvester. Long story short, Sylvester says, there's a new part for a Goldwyn picture. I'm going to pick you up. A car stops. She gets into the car. They go to the rear gate of the the Goldwyn Mayer studio. And here's what happens. We'll go to my office, Mr. Sylvester said, steering me by the elbow. I'll audition you there. We walked up a flight of stairs, down a hallway. Mr. Sylvester stopped in front of a door. I hope they haven't locked me out, he said. No, still open. I noticed the name Duggan on the door, and Mr. Sylvester said, patting my back, maybe Dugan and I share this office for audition purposes. It was a well-furnished office. Mr. Sylvester told me to sit down on the couch. Have you ever been farther ahead of a story?
Yeah, right.
Right. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
What do you want me to audition? I asked. Mr. Sylvester picked up a script from his desk and handed it to me. It was the first movie script I had ever held in my hands. Which part do you wish me to read? I asked. I could hardly get the words out of my mouth. I kept thinking, get hold of yourself. You're an actress. You mustn't let your face twitch. Try one of the long speeches, Mr. Sylvester said. I looked up at him surprised. He seemed almost as excited as me. I opened the script and began to read. Would you please raise your dress a few inches? Mr. Sylvester interrupted. I lifted the hem above my knee and kept on reading. A little higher, please, said Mr. Sylvester. I lifted the hem to my thighs without missing a word of the speech. I will always love you, I read in the throbbing voice I used. For hail to thee, blithe spirit. No matter what becomes of me, Alfred. A little higher, Mr. Sylvester said. I thought Mr. Sylvester was probably in a hurry and wanted to audition my figure and emotional talents at the same time. Still reciting this from the script, I pulled my dress up and uncovered my thighs, and suddenly, Mr. Sylvester was on the couch. For a moment, I was too sick at heart to move. I saw him plain. The whole thing was a fake. He didn't work for Goldwyn. It wasn't his office. He had pulled the audition gag in order to get me alone on a couch. I sat with my dress up and the treasured script in my hand while he started pawing me. Then I moved. I socked him in the eye, jumped up, kicked him, and banged my heel down on his toes and ran out of the building. For some time afterward, Mr. Sylvester's words haunted me as if I had heard the true voice of Hollywood. Higher. Higher.
Yeah.
Higher.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Oh. Had to cover that.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. Nothing changes. I mean, Weinstein or whatever.
Yeah. Harvey. Yeah, Weinstein.
Yeah, Harvey. Yeah. So no, nothing changes, and I'm sure it's going on somewhere right now.
Yeah, it'll morph and it'll change, and as long as there's a power dynamic between people, and there are people who gatekeep and hold the keys to the thing that people desire more than anything else, which is validation,
right,
and the desire to be seen. As long as there are gatekeepers holding those keys, it will be abused. And it's the system itself that's abusive. There's no way to you will never fix the system.
Yeah,
as constituted.
That's probably true. Yeah. I don't know even how you'd change it. So, it's
I don't.
The only people who are going to pursue to be on camera are people who want some attention, right? So it's like, interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that they sell too.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit. I quite like this. I'm going to read a little more here, and then we'll get back into the bio. In Hollywood, a girl's virtue is much less important than her hairdo. You're judged by how you look, not by what you are. Hollywood's a place where they'll pay you $1,000 for a kiss and 50 cents for your soul. I know because I turned down the first offer often enough and held out for the 50 cents. It wasn't because I had moral ideas, nor because I saw what happened to girls who took money from men and let men support them as their sweeties. Nothing happened to such girls that wouldn't have happened to them anyway. Sometimes they got ditched and had to hook up with new lovers, or they got their names in the movie columns for being seen in the smart places, and this landed them jobs in the studios. Or after going from love nest to love nest for a few years, they met someone who fell in love with them and got married and had children. A few of them even became famous. It may be different in other places, but in Hollywood, being virtuous is a juvenile-sounding phrase like having the mumps. Maybe it was the nickel Mr. Kimmel once gave me, or maybe it was the $5 a week the orphanage used to sell me for, but men who tried to buy me with money made me sick. There were plenty of them. The mere fact that I turned down offers ran my price up. I was young, blonde, and curvaceous, and I had learned to talk huskily like Marlene Dietrich, and to walk a little wantonly, and to bring emotion into my eyes when I wanted to. And though these achievements landed me no job, they brought a lot of wolves whistling at my heels. They weren't just little wolves with big schemes and frayed cuffs. There were bona fide check signers, too. I rode with them in their limousines and sat in swanky cafes with them where I usually ate like a horse to make up for a week of skimpy drugstore counter meals. And I went to the big Beverly Hills homes with them and sat by while they played gin or poker. I was never at ease in these homes or in the swanky cafes. For one thing, my clothes became cheap and shabby looking in swell surroundings. I had to sit with my legs in such a position that the runs or the mends in my stockings wouldn't show, and I had to keep my elbows out of sight for the same reason. The men like to show off to each other and to the kibitzers by gambling for high stakes. When I saw them hand $100 and even $1,000 bills to each other, I felt something bitter in my heart. I remembered how much 25 cents and even nickels meant to the people I had known, how happy $10 would have made them, how $100 would have changed their whole lives. When the men laughed and pocketed the thousands of dollars of winnings as if they were made of tissue paper, I remembered my Aunt Grace and me waiting in line at the Holmes Bakery to buy a sack full of stale bread for $0.25 to live on a whole week. And I remembered how she had gone with one of her lenses missing from her glasses for 3 months because she couldn't afford the 50 cents to buy its replacement. I remembered all the sounds and smells of poverty, the fright in people's eyes when they lost jobs, and the way they skimped and drudged in order to get through the week. And I saw the blue dress and white blouse walking the 2 miles to school again, rain or shine, because a nickel was too big a sum to raise for bus fare. I didn't dislike the men for being rich or being indifferent to money, but something hurt me in my heart when I saw their easy come, easy go $1,000 bills. One evening, a rich man said to me, "I'll buy you a couple of real outfits, fur coats and all, and I'll pay your rent in a nice apartment and give you an eating allowance, and you don't even have to go to bed with me. All I ask is to take you out to cafes and parties and for you to act as if you were my girl, and I'll say goodnight to you outside your door and never ask you to let me in. It'll just be a make-believe affair. What do you say?" And that really is what it's all about in the end, isn't it? That and the sex, but going on. I answered him, "I don't like men with fancy schemes like you. I like straightforward wolves better. I know how to get along with them, but I'm always nervous with liars." "What makes you think I'm lying?" he asked. "Because if you didn't want me, you wouldn't try to buy me." I didn't take their money, and they couldn't get by my front door, but I kept riding in their limousines and sitting beside them in the swanky places. There was always a chance a job and not another wolf might spot you. Besides, there was the matter of food. I never felt squeamish about eating my head off. Food wasn't part of any purchase price. Now we live in the dominion of OnlyFans, and they've decentralized this, haven't they? In a way.
You right. Oh, geez.
Subscribe to the e-girl.
There's a way, I could see though this situation with this guy's basically saying, "I need you as my status symbol."
Be a geisha. Be a geisha for me.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could almost see in her position, we're like, yeah, maybe that's not a bad deal, right?
Women still do this. People still do this. You become a kept person. I mean, it's this whole sugar baby thing. I mean, she calls them sweeties. That's what they used to call them. Oh, she's his sweetie. And he's a big studio executive, and he's probably got a couple around town. Yeah. Set you up with an apartment, maybe give you a job. Yeah. This is not, it feels alien to us because we're dimwits from the Midwest. Right. Yeah. Who make an exceptional podcast. Let's be real. Right. But I mean, this is just how the world, it's just how a not insubstantial part of the world operates. And again, it's still this.
It's sophisticated in a certain way, right?
It just means they have money. That's all it means. There's just more. There's excess money floating around. That's what it means. All right. Another para from Wikipedia. Then I've got a fun bit about a feud that she had with Zsa Zsa Gabor, which went on for quite a long time. All right. Monroe spent her first 6 months at Fox learning acting and singing and dancing and observing the filmmaking process. Her contract was renewed in February of 47, and she was given her first film roles, bit parts in Dangerous Years. And and this one's so fun. Scudda hoo, scudda hey.
That's the name of the movie?
Scudda hoo, scudda hey. Yeah, with exclamation points after that.
Excellent.
I didn't look up scudda hoo, scudda hey. In Technicolor.
Oh, of course.
It's based on a novel. The film tells the story of two antagonistic stepbrothers living in a Midwestern farm with their mother. One of them takes a job as a hired hand with a neighboring farmer from whom he buys a pair of mules and must learn to train them, and whose daughter he is in love with, though she entices both brothers to compete for her affections.
This is the biggest mismatch between premise and title that I have ever. I mean, I don't know what I was imagining, but not that. That sounds like
Scudda-hoo, Scudda-hey, Scudda-hoo. I have no idea. Yeah, that would be a fun one to watch, just because, like, where does this title come from? Okay, well, good. Scudda-hoo, Scudda-hey. All right. The studio also enrolled her in the Actors Laboratory Theater, an acting school teaching the techniques of the group theater. She later stated that it was my first taste of what real acting in a real drama could be, and I was hooked. So I got a little more about Hollywood here from her. I really enjoy this book, and I choose to believe that these are largely her words, although the degree to which it was polished, leads me to believe that the fellow that she worked on with this, or who took it after, from his notes and collections, there's probably a pretty heavy hand, is my guess.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because you can sort of hear this isn't. All right, so let's get into. I think this is a party. 1 second. So she's at a party. She meets Clark Gable.
Oh,
all right. My escort whispered to me, "The food's in the other room. Come on." He went off without me. I remained in the hall looking into a room full of wonderful furniture and wonderful people. Jennifer Jones was sitting on a couch. Olivia de Havilland was standing near a little table. Jean Tierney was laughing next to her. There were so many famous others I couldn't focus on them. Evening gowns and famous faces drifted around in the room, laughing and chatting. Diamonds glittered. There were men too, but I only looked at one. Clark Gable stood by himself, holding a highball and smiling wistfully at the air. He looked so familiar that it made me dizzy. I stood as straight as I could and put on the highest class expression I knew, but I couldn't enter the room. Here, Brad, for me, on YouTube, for the YouTube, put on your highest class expression. YouTube.com/@artofdarkpod if you want to see.
Give me yours. What's yours, Kevin? Let's see it. Yeah, that's pretty high class.
You have my monocle on.
Yeah, you have to be sort of thinking about something.
Right. Yeah.
But it's sort of like you're thinking if you're going to purchase it or not.
Yeah, I've thought about it, but it's not that important. And if I forget it, someone else will remind me about it later.
Right.
That's your direction. Yeah, that's quite fun. All right. So she's seeing Clark Gable in person, IRL, for the first time.
Yeah.
A voice spoke. "My dear young lady," it said, "do come and sit by my side." It was a charming voice, a little fuzzy with liquor, but very distinguished. I turned and saw a man sitting by himself in the stairway. He was holding a drink in his hand. His face was sardonic, like his voice. That's what you want. You want a sardonic face. Mm-hmm. "Do you mean me?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Pardon me if I don't rise. My name is George Sanders." I said, "How do you do?" "I presume you also have a name?" He scowled at me. "I'm Marilyn Monroe." "You will forgive me for not having heard it before. Do sit down beside me." This reminds me of Eyes Wide Shut. "I'm Hungarian."
Yeah.
"I'm American." "May I have the honor of asking you to marry me?" he said solemnly. "The name, in case you have forgotten, is Sanders." I smiled at him and didn't answer. "You are naturally a little reluctant to marry one who is not only a stranger, but an actor," Mr. Sanders said. "I can understand your hesitancy, particularly on the second ground. An actor is not quite a human being, but then who is?" Mr. Sanders' handsome and witty face suddenly looked at me intently. "Blonde, pneumatic, and full of peasant health. Just the type meant for me." I thought he was going to put his arm around me, but he didn't. His voice sounded sleepy as he continued. "Please think it over, Miss Monroe. I can promise you only one thing if you marry me. You'll become one of the most glamorous stars in Hollywood. I'll help you. Word of honor." Mr. Sanders put his glass down and dozed off. I left him on the stairs and walked across the hall out of the mansion door into the Beverly Hills night. I felt grateful to Mr. Sanders for having spoken to me, but out of the incident came my first Hollywood feud. A year and a half later, I was still broken looking for jobs, but the first little buzz of success had touched my name. I'd been on the screen in The Asphalt Jungle, and audiences had whistled at me, just as the wolves on the beach had done the first time I'd worn a bathing suit. And though I didn't seem able to land another job after my great success, the photographers were after me as a model. Among them was Tony Beauchamp, who was one of the more important camera artists in Hollywood. He was married to Sarah Churchill. I had been to his studio often to sit for pictures. One day he asked me to come to his home on Sunday afternoon for cocktails. I was thrilled by the invitation and eager to meet his wife. I had always looked up to Winston Churchill as an oldish but very noble man. I assume Sarah Churchill is maybe Churchill's daughter. Yeah. The Beauchamp home was on the beach. I drove out alone, dressed in a sweater and skirt. I hadn't yet learned that come for cocktails meant a party. I thought the cocktails would be only for Mr. and Mrs. Beauchamp and me. When I entered the home, I stood still and didn't move. It was filled with people all drinking cocktails. The only person I knew was Tony. Make yourself at home, he said, and introduced me to his wife. I said, how do you do? And remained standing still. They moved on. I noticed a commotion among the guests at the other end of the crowded room. A blonde with a funny accent was cutting loose about something. I couldn't make out her words, but she was whooping away in an unmistakable fury. I saw her take a tall man by the arm and march him out of the room. The tall man looked familiar. Tony came up to me with a grin. Dear, what have you done to Zsa Zsa Gabor? Who is that? The Hungarian bombshell. You just drove her out of the party, fuming. Maybe she didn't approve of my sweater. I wouldn't have worn it if I'd known it was a party. Oh, no, said Tony. It's deeper than that. Zsa Zsa said, Sarah and I couldn't expect nice people to remain at our party if people like you joined it. Now, frankly, Marilyn, what in heaven's name did you do to her? Nothing. I never even saw her before. I walked over to have a look at this Hungarian bombshell. I saw she was one of those blondes who put on 10 years if you take a close look at them. Biting. I also saw that the tall, handsome man she was clucking and making other Hungarian chicken noises at was George Sanders. I learned from Tony beside me that Mr. Sanders was her husband.
Oh, jeez.
Poor Mr. Sanders. He had made that stairway speech too often.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, she's on the scene. Would you consider marrying me? Is George Sanders, or Saunders, is he a recognizable? Is he a face that you recognize? Okay, he's a British actor. Could have done a little more of a Brit accent. Yeah, he was born in St. Petersburg. Okay. Man, I love this like old timey Hollywood. One of the fun things about this pod is that you kind of, because that's a weak. I'm weak on that stuff. I love old movies. I have some, Criterion, and I watch them very often. They're a lot better than what's made now, more often than not. Yeah. But it's just not been historically an area of interest for me. So I love this stuff, Yeah, kind of brushing up on all this old stuff. So let me see. I think I have another bit about parties here. This is a fun book. All right, so I'll read a little more about parties. I was to go to a number of fancy Hollywood parties and stand among the glamorous figures dressed as well as any of them and laugh as if I were overcome with joy. But I never felt any more at ease than I did the first time I watched from the hallway. The chief fun people get out of those parties comes from the next day when they are able to spread the news of the famous people with whom they associated at so-and-so's house. Nothing changes. Mm-hmm. So did you get it on the gram? Most parties are run on the star system. In Hollywood, a star isn't only an actor or actress or movie executive. It can also be somebody who has recently been arrested for something or beaten up or exposed in a love triangle. If it was played up in the newspapers, then this person is treated as a social star as long as his or her publicity continues. I don't know if high society is different in other cities, but in Hollywood, important people can't stand to be invited someplace that isn't full of other important people. They don't mind a few unfamous people being present because they make good listeners. But if a star or a studio chief or any other great movie personages find themselves sitting among a lot of nobodies, they get frightened as if somebody was trying to demote them. I love that insight. It's just so right. Yeah. We all know this is how it is, but and when you're in a room like that, it's one of the most disgusting places you'll ever be. It's awful. I hate it. I hate being in any situation that remotely smells like that. Anytime anybody wants to have a gala, anything like that, I'm just gonna go right over here. Yeah. Right. Another couple paras. I could never understand why important people are always so eager to dress up and come together to look at each other. Maybe 3 or 4 of them will have something to say to somebody, but the 20 or 30 others will just sit around like lumps on a log and stare at each other with false smiles. The host usually bustles about trying to get the guests involved in some kind of a game or guessing contest, or he tries to get somebody to make a speech about something so as to start a general argument. But usually the guests fail to respond, and the party just drags on with nothing happening until the Sandman arrives. This is the signal for the guests to start leaving. Nearly everybody draws the line at falling asleep outright at a party. The reason I went to parties of this sort was to advertise myself.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's got to hustle, man. That's the thing, is she's got a dream and she's got to hustle. So she's got to kind of, not that all this stuff is okay, but she's got to like put up with it. And she's aware of that, it seems. So,
Yep. And this is where she falls in with a fellow named Joe Schenk. She also says there's another side of a Hollywood party that is very important socially. It is a place where romances are made and unmade.
Sure.
And the first fame I achieved was a wave of gossip that identified me as Joe Schenk's girl. And I believe Schenk is a studio head. Well, it's in the bio here. Mr. Schenk had invited me to his Beverly Hills mansion. Yeah, studio head. For dinner one evening. Then he fell into the habit of inviting me 2 or 3 times a week. I went to Mr. Schenk's mansion the first few times because he was one of the heads of my studio. After that, I went because I liked him. Also, the food was very good, and there were always important people at the table. These weren't party figures, but were Mr. Schenk's personal friends. I seldom spoke 3 words during dinner, but would sit at Mr. Schenk's elbow and listen like a sponge. The fact that people began to talk about me being Joe Schenk's girl didn't annoy me at first, but later it did annoy me. Mr. Schenk never so much as laid a finger on my wrist or tried to. He was interested in me because I was a good table ornament, because I was what he called an offbeat personality. I liked sitting around the fireplace with Mr. Schenk and hearing him talk about love and sex. He was full of wisdom on these subjects, like some great explorer. I also liked to look at his face. It was as much the face of a town as of a man. The whole history of Hollywood was in it. Perhaps the chief reason I was happy to have won Mr. Schenk's friendship was the great feeling of security it gave me. As a friend and protege of one of the heads of my own studio, what could go wrong for me? I got the answer to that question one Monday morning. I was called into the casting department and informed that I was being dropped by the studio and that my presence would no longer be required. I couldn't talk. I sat listening and unable to move. The casting official explained that I had been given several chances and that while I had acquitted myself fairly well, it was the opinion of the studio that I was not photogenic. That was, which is hilarious. That was the reason, he said, that Mr. Zanuck had cut me out of the pictures in which I had played bit parts. So she'd been in a number of movies, but then cut.
Right.
Mr. Zanuck feels that you may turn into an actress sometime, but that your type of looks is definitely against you. I went into my room and lay down in bed and cried. I cried for a week. I didn't eat or talk or comb my hair. I kept crying as if I were at a funeral burying Marilyn Monroe. So, getting back to the bio, it's not easy for a young gal
this reminds me of that there's a certain kind of feeling there, right? Her whole, and I'm not dismissing her intelligence or her skills, but like up to this point, her whole thing is her appearance and the effect she has on people, right? And then to be told, like, yeah, you know what, you're not really good looking in the right way.
Right. You're too good looking to be an actor. They will never, they don't want you're too much, I think is the note there. Right.
Yeah. It's crazy. That would be kind of devastating.
Well, it's funny because she's either going to be a huge star or she's going to be a nobody. I don't think that there's any middle ground for someone like Marilyn. Like, she talks about it. Like, when she came on the screen, it shows up later, and I'll probably touch on it. But there's at one point where she has a proper speaking role. Like, some of the other people in Hollywood were like, we've never seen somebody play a small part and get the reaction that you did. Like, people would whoop and holler in the theater when she would come on and give lines. I mean, so all or nothing. All right. Despite her enthusiasm, her teachers thought her too shy and insecure to have a future in acting, and Fox did not renew her contract in August of 1947. She returned to modeling while also doing occasional odd jobs at film studios, such as working as a dancing pacer behind the scenes to keep the leads on point at musical sets. You don't know this, but this is one of the behind the scenes things about Art of Darkness. I have a pacer right over here in the corner. And he's periodically, rubbing his goatee and drinking water. He's reminding me to drink water and take breaks. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. He's telling me to get back to the outline right now to move forward. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. But that's what a funny job. Like you're sort of like real. You're helping, you're dancing with the dancers, sort of fun, kind of weird. Yeah. Very bottom of the rung in Hollywood, I would say. But at least you're on set, you're around it.
Yeah.
Monroe was determined to make it as an actress and continued studying at the Actors Lab. She had a small role in the play Glamour Preferred at the Bliss Hayden Theater, but it ended after a couple of performances. Womp, womp, womp. That's never good.
Wait, the Actors Lab, is that like an MK Ultra thing, or?
I assume so. She was married to the man who invented the SWAT team, so clearly, no, I don't know about the Actors Lab, Brad. I can't speak to the quality of brainwashing there. To network, she frequented producers' offices, befriended gossip columnist Sidney Skulski, and entertained influential male guests at studio functions, a practice she had begun at Fox. She also became a friend and occasional sex partner of Fox executive Joseph M. Schenck. So there's another contradiction. Book says, no, he never touched me. Mm-hmm. Wiki says yes. Mm-hmm. I think they probably, canoodled. Mm-hmm. Who persuaded his friend Henry Cohn, the head of Executive Columbia Pictures, to sign her in March of 1948. These are like feudal lords. So we're going to cut her from our studio, but I'm going to talk to Cohn, and Cohn's going to sign because she's my girl. She's a good girl. Gosh darn it. And Marilyn's going places. Mm-hmm. So I've got some more readings from her. And this is about the darkness in Hollywood. So she gets a place. Schenck basically says, try so-and-so studio. She does. Mm-hmm. She's being made an extra. I don't know that I want to go in and tell this whole story, but I think I'll probably ad-lib this. Okay, no, this is good. So she gets a check from the studio, and she's going around and she's trying to get the check cashed. She cannot get the check cashed because she doesn't have a bank account. She doesn't, right? So she sees a policeman. So this'll take you right back to the old timey ways that used to happen. She can't get a check cashed. I saw a policeman looking at me, so I went up to him. Pardon me, officer. Could you help me, please? I want to get a check cashed, and I don't know where. He smiled and said, well, that is a serious predicament. Come along, I'll see what I can do. What sort of check is it? It's a payroll check from the 20th Century Fox studio. Are you employed there? I'm not employed there any longer. It's her last check from the previous studio. But they are still in business. The policeman took me, and they're still in business today.
Yeah.
The policeman took me into a store. He spoke to the manager, who agreed to cash the check. So you're an actress, said the policeman. I used to be, but as I told you, I'm not working at the moment. The manager brought the check back and said, would you mind putting your name and address in the back of this? I did, and noticed the policeman watching me. I also looked at his face for the first time. He had dark hair and his eyes were close together. After doing my shopping, I stopped in a doctor's office. I had a cold, and I had not slept for several nights. The doctor gave me sleeping pills.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
Put a pin in
right
it.
There. Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
I don't usually recommend sleeping pills, he said, but you've been having hysterics too long. A good sleep will not only be good for your cold, but cheer you up.
Yeah.
I went to bed early and took the pill. I'd been sleeping for a few hours when a noise woke me. I'd never heard this sort of noise before, but I knew what it was. Somebody was cutting the screen of my bedroom window. I jumped out of bed and ran out of the house. I went around the side to look. A man was starting to climb into my bedroom window. I imitated a gruff male voice and crawled indignantly. Hey, what are you doing there? The man pulled his head out of the window and looked toward me. Get away from here, or I'll call the police. The man started toward me. I turned and ran. It was around midnight. I ran down the deserted suburban street. I was barefooted, and I was wearing the new style of half nightgown. It came just a little below the waist. I arrived at a neighbor's house and yelled. He came down with his wife behind me. She started yelling when she saw me. I explained that the man about the man trying to break into my bedroom and asked the neighbor to go capture him. The neighbor shook his head. The fellow probably has a gun. Burglars usually carry them. He's not a burglar. He was after me. That's why you need a SWAT team.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding.
Yeah.
I telephoned the police and covered myself with a quilt. The police took an hour to arrive.
Oh my God.
Nothing changes. I went back to the house with them. They found the cut screen and footprints and everything. Well, you scared them off, the detective said.
Oh my
You
God.
have nothing to worry about. You can go back to bed. But what if he returns?
This guy snuck in to her window, but we didn't catch him. But it's fine. You're fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, detective. Never happens. Once a burglar is scared off the premise, he'll never return to that place. Just relax, miss, and go to sleep. We'll let you know if anything turns up. There was a loud knocking on the door. I jumped 2 feet. It was around 1 a.m. Do you usually get company at this time of night? The detective asked me. No, I never have any company. Nobody has ever come to call on me. Go open the door, the detective ordered. I went to the door and opened it. It was the screen cutter. He made a grab for me and I screamed. The two detectives seized him. That's the man, I yelled. He's the burglar. What's all this? The man scowled at the detectives holding him. Marilyn's an old friend. Good old Marilyn. And he winked at me and said, tell him, honey. I don't know the man, I said. He looks a little familiar, but I don't know him. Let me go, the man cried. You can't arrest somebody for calling on an old friend. How about it? One of the detectives said to me. Let's have the truth, Ms. Monroe. Is this an old sweetie of yours? I could feel that they were believing the man, and I was terrified they would go away and leave him alone with me. He's no burglar, the detective scowled at me. He knows your name and address. He comes back after you chase him away. Obviously, The other detective was searching the man and pulled a revolver out of his pocket. Hey, he interrupted. This is a police gun. Where'd you get this? At the words police gun, I knew who the man was. It was the policeman with the eyes close together who had helped me cash my $40 check. He'd memorized the name and address as I wrote them on the back of the check. I hadn't recognized him because he was out of uniform. I told the detectives who he was. He denied it, but they found an LAPD card in his pocket. They took him away. The next day, the detectives visited, told me the man was a new cop, that he was married and had a 14-month-old baby. They said they would rather I didn't file any charges against the man because it would give the police force a black eye. I don't want to punish him, but I would like to be sure he didn't try to do that to me again or to any other girl. The detectives assured me he wouldn't. So I didn't file any charges. Instead, I moved out. I went back to a Hollywood bedroom and I stayed in it for several days and nights without moving. I cried and stared out the window. Boys will be boys, Brad.
Yeah, right.
Yikes.
What's the big deal, Marilyn?
What is going on?
And the cops just like believing him, like, oh, well, this guy says that he's your friend. So you must be like, what is she trying to even get away with? Like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
It's just a dame being a dame.
Right. She's being hysterical. Give her some sleeping pills.
Give her some more sleeping pills.
Yeah, just shut this down. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Why would she need sleeping pills? Unbelievable. I mean, dude, the world is just, God.
Yeah.
It's not always a good place.
No.
It's really, really tough.
Should have just stayed with old Jim Doherty, maybe. I don't know.
No, I don't know, man. No, she made herself a star.
It's true.
She made herself a star on her looks and her wits and her talent.
Yeah.
She did it, man.
Yeah.
She did it. I know it's so tough, man. But like, again, it's like the system. It really is.
Yeah. Grinds you up.
It does not care. It has no soul. You go up to a police officer and then
that guy breaks in your window that same night.
But like, and this isn't at all like victim blaming, but like that also gives you an idea of like how powerful she is as like a force.
Right.
Like she's just undeniable.
Right.
Do you know? Like she's making impressions like that. So yeah, of course it would carry over to the screen. You know, it's just strange, man. Yeah, awful.
Like
and of course she's traumatized and like re-traumatized and ugh. All right. So we're getting through to her breakthrough years, and I'm coming up to the point. Well, we're maybe about halfway there. I might have to start to churn some things through here. All right. So at Columbia, Her look was modeled after Rita Hayworth, and her hair was bleached platinum blonde. She began working with the studio's head drama coach, who would remain her mentor until 1955, a woman named Natasha Lytess. Her only film at the studio was the low-budget musical Ladies of the Chorus, in which she had her first starring role as a chorus girl courted by a wealthy man. She also screen tested for the lead in Born Yesterday, but her contract was not renewed. The Ladies of the Chorus was released the following month and was not a success, so things are not going well. At this point, she falls in love. She does not name him, and I'm just going to sort of go through this abruptly. He's married now to a movie star, and it might embarrass him if I used his real name, and her too. I read in the paper that their marriage, only a year old, is heading for the Hollywood Reefs, where most of the movie land marriages come apart. A few years ago, I might have felt like giving it a push just for old time's sake. But now I'm happy, and I wish him well, and I wish anybody he loves well. I was coming out of the casting department at MGM with the usual results, no job and no prospects, when a girl I knew introduced me to an ordinary-looking man. All I could tell about him was that he wasn't an actor. Actors are often wonderful and charming people, but for a woman to love an actor is something like incest. It's like loving a brother with the same face and manners as your own. Sorry, actors. I don't know if I agree with that. It's pretty heavy. So they go to a cafe. She's looking at him. He's a musician. He plays the piano. And she says, I didn't think of him as a man or a musician. All I thought was he's alive and strong. He calls her up. She goes to join him. And after a few weeks, she knows she's in love. And this is the first time she describes her heart opening. I sat alone thinking a lot about the past and understanding the frosty-hearted child, Norma Jean. She would never have lived to grow up if her heart had had love in it. Now, waiting for him when he was 15 minutes late filled me with agony. Had I loved anyone or anything in my childhood and girlhood, what 1,000 agonies there would have been every day. Maybe there were, and I had hidden them. Maybe that's why it hurts so now to love, and why my heart kept carrying on as if I were going to explode with pain and longing. I thought a great deal about him and other men. My lover was a strong individual. I don't mean he was dominant. A strong man doesn't have to be dominant for a woman. He doesn't match his strength against a woman's weakness, when she's in love with him. He matches it against the world. She writes just effusively about this. Yeah. I tried to figure out what was so different about my life than before him. It was the same, no hopes, no prospects, all doors closed. The troubles were still there, every one of them, but they were like dust swept into a corner. There was one new thing: sex. Sex is a baffling thing when it doesn't happen. I used to wake up in the morning when I was married and wonder if the whole world was crazy, whooping about sex all the time. It was like hearing all the time that stove polish was the greatest invention on earth. Then it dawned on me that other women were different than me. They could feel things I couldn't. And when I started reading books, I ran into the words frigid, rejected, and lesbian. I wondered if I was all three of those things. A man who had kissed me once said it was very possible I was a lesbian because I apparently had no response to males, meaning him. I didn't contradict him because I didn't know what I was. There were times even when I didn't feel human, and times when all I could think of was dying. There was also the sinister fact that a well-made woman had always thrilled me to look at. Now, having fallen in love, I knew what I was. It wasn't a lesbian. The world and its excitement over sex didn't seem crazy. In fact, it didn't seem crazy enough. And this relationship was not to work out, but obviously. But there, she finally kind of feels it and has it and gets it. Okay. And I'm happy that she got there, because with a childhood like hers, she could have just been
closed off and for sure. It would be a logical defense mechanism for sure.
Right. Just to cope. Okay. Yeah. So
is there any speculation who that guy is?
I poked around for a while. I'm sure in one of the bios they probably have it. I could probably poke around.
No, it's okay. I was just curious. I mean,
I actually devoted some time. Here's what I've got. It looks like it was Hal Schaefer.
Okay.
Let's see here. In the early 50s, well, maybe it was him. The virtuosic jazz pianist Hal Schaefer was working behind the scenes at 20th Century Fox as a musician, musical arranger, and vocal coach. He tutored many film stars in the finer points of singing, but none more glamorous than Marilyn Monroe. But yes, the two became lovers. Okay, I found it. So it looks like it's Hal Schaefer behind the paywall at Washington Post.
They don't want the people to know.
Yo, if you go online and you start doing a search, Marilyn Monroe's like lover, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, and here's the website. She knows all the men Marilyn Monroe reportedly had relationships with throughout her short life. And I don't even think Hal Schaefer is on here. So it's like, what, like what is going on? So, okay. All right. We do our best to deliver you accurate information on Art of Darkness. Yeah. We are not historians. These are biographical profiles. We are profiling these figures. This will probably go into 4 or 5 hours. The After Dark will probably go long for Patreon, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We do our best. If we get anything wrong, we do love hearing from people, especially on Twitter. Because that's Brad at Art of Dark Pod on the Bird website. All right. So we're now heading into the 50s, 1949. When her contract at Columbia ended, Monroe returned again to modeling. She shot a commercial for Pabst beer. Pabst Blue Ribbon.
All right.
Yeah. Heineken. The next line. And posed for artistic nude photographs. This will come back by Tom Kelly for John Baumgarth calendars using the name Mona Monroe. Because nobody will figure it out, Marilyn.
No.
Monroe had previously posed topless or clad in a bikini for other artists, including Earl Moran, and felt comfortable with nudity. All right, so I've got a little bit more here. Yeah. Well, I mean, she had fantasized about getting naked in church.
Right. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's artistic.
Yeah.
So,
this chapter is called How I Made a Calendar. So she's lost her car and she needs $50 to get the car back. The phone rings. It was a photographer I knew named Tom Kelly. He and his wife, Natalie, had been nice to me. I had posed for some beer ads for Tom. Come on over, he said. I've got a job for you. This is a little different from the other jobs when I arrived at his place. But there's $50 in it for you if you want to do it. See, the universe sends you signs, Brad.
Yeah.
Well, golly gee, I just happen to need $50. I told Tom and Natalie about the repossessing of my car. For $50, I am ready to jump off a roof, I said. Nothing changes. These pictures are for a calendar, said Tom. And they will have to be in the nude. You mean completely nude? I asked. That's it, said Tom, except they will not be vulgar. You're ideal for the job, not only because you have a fine shape, but you're unknown. Nobody will recognize you. I'm sure unknown.
Marilyn, nobody cares about you. Doesn't matter what happens to you or what you do.
Did you say you needed $50? I'm sure unknown, I said.
You've got no family. You've got no friends.
What do you have to lose?
You've been spat out of the bottom side of the film industry.
Right.
Take your clothes off in this garage studio.
It'd be different if you were a starlet or some such thing, said Natalie. Then somebody might recognize you on the calendar. With you, there'll be no such trouble possible, said Tom. It'll just be a picture of a beautiful body. God.
Okay.
I spent the afternoon posing. I was a little confused at first, and something kept nudging me in my head. Sitting naked in front of a camera and striking joyous poses reminded me of the dreams I used to have as a child. I felt sad that this should be the only dream I ever had to come true. After a few poses, the depression left me. I liked my body. I was glad I hadn't eaten much in the past few days. The pictures would show a real washboard stomach. And what difference would it make, the nude of a beautiful body? People have curious attitudes about nudity, just as they have about sex. Nudity and sex are the most commonplace things in the world, yet people often act as if they were things that only existed on Mars. I thought of such matters as I posed, but the nudging continued in my head. What if I became an actress sometime, a great star, and somebody saw me on the calendar and recognized me? What are you looking so serious about? Tom asked. I was just thinking something. What? Nothing worth repeating, I said. I'm just crazy. I get all kinds of crazy thoughts. I had my car back the next day and was able to romp around from studio to studio and enjoy the usual quota of snubs. Yeah. She needed that car. You can't be out in LA.
No car.
Yeah. Not going to work. All right. Shortly after leaving Columbia, She also met and became the protege and mistress of Johnny Hyde, who is the vice president of William Morris Agency.
Oh, okay.
Still a big agency.
Yeah.
William Morris, if you're out there, we think you're the most fabulous agency in Hollywood, California.
Yeah.
And if you rep podcasters, boy, gee whiz, we'd love a phone call from your current Johnny Hyde.
Oh
gee
boy!
Whiz. Oh boy! Golly gee, mister,
we're gonna make it.
We're gonna make it in Hollywood. Fun. So this is where she meets the Marx Brothers.
Oh.
And this is around the time she's in love with this musician.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Someone I met at a lunch counter told me they were making retakes on a movie called Love Happy and needed a girl for a bit part. Harpo and Groucho Marx were in the movie. I went on the set and found the producer Lester Cohen in charge. He was a small man with dark, sad eyes. He introduced me to Groucho and Harpo Marx. It was like meeting familiar characters at a Mother Goose. There they were with the same happy, crazy look I had seen on the screen. They both smiled at me as if I were a piece of French pastry. This is the young lady for the office bit, said Mr. Cowan. Groucho stared thoughtfully at me. Can you walk? He demanded. Well, we know she can.
Yeah, it's one of her best things.
I'm not referring to the type of walking my Tante Zippa has mastered, said Groucho. This role calls for a young lady who can walk by me in such a manner as to arouse my elderly libido and cause smoke to issue from my ears. Harpo honked a horn at the end of his cane and grinned at me. Honk, honk. This is the best meeting. This is a great meeting. I walked the way Groucho... Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
She's been practicing this since she was 13.
Right. The smoke's going to go. He's going to go, ooga, ooga.
Partner. Perfect. But we need more comedy. We need more pure comedy in the world.
Yeah,
we truly do.
Yeah.
Comedy is the only thing that works. Pure tragedy reminds us of human nature, but comedy is much easier to achieve, I think, than pure tragedy. Pure tragedy is very, very difficult. But comedy, man, God, and good comedy achieves exactly the same function as tragedy. It brings us all down to a level. It levels everything. Really does. So I'm sorry for the editorial.
No, not at all.
Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, I walked the way Groucho wanted. Exceedingly well done, he beamed. Honk, honk, honk. Harpo's horn honked 3 times, then he stuck his fingers in his mouth and blew a piercing whistle. Walk again, said Mr. Cowan. I walked up and down in front of the 3 men. They stood grinning. It's Mae West, Theta Bara, and Bo Peep all rolled into one, said Groucho. We shoot the scene tomorrow morning. Come early. And don't do any walking in any unpoliced areas, said Harpo.
Or policed areas.
Yeah, really. Matter. Yeah, right. For that matter. Yeah. I played the next day. Groucho directed me. It was hardly more than a walk-on, but Mr. Cowan, the producer, said I had the makings of a star and that he was going to do something about it right away. When you're broke and a nobody and a man tells you that he becomes a genius in your eyes, but nothing happened for a week. I sat every evening listening to my lover argue about my various shortcomings, and I remained blissfully happy. Then one morning, I found my name in the headline of Luella Parsons' movie column in the LA Examiner. I was so excited I fell out of bed. The headline said Lester Cohen had put me under contract to star in a forthcoming movie. That was something to read. I dressed and made up quicker than a fireman and squandered my last $2 on a taxi. Mr. Cowan was in his office. What can I do for you, Miss Monroe? He inquired. I would like to sign the contract that I read about in Miss Luella Parsons' columns. I haven't drawn it up yet. It will take a while. How much are you going to pay me? I asked. $100 a week will be enough, I said. He said he hadn't decided on a figure, so she says $100 a week. We'll see about it, Mr. Cowan replied. You just go home and wait till you hear from me. I'll send for you. Your word of honor? I asked. Word of honor. I borrowed $2 from a friend I knew, sort of, and hurried off to a jewelry store. I had never given my lover a present. This is the man she's head over heels with, and he's a little cool. I'd never given him a present of any kind due to my financial conditions. Now I saw a chance to give him something beautiful. I showed the man in the jewelry store the headline in Luella Parsons' column and my picture in it. I'm Marilyn Monroe. You can compare me to the photograph. I can see you are, the jeweler agreed. I haven't any money now, In fact, I have less than $2 in the world, but you can see from what it says in Miss Parsons' column that I am on my way to stardom and will soon receive a great deal of money from Mr. Cowan." The jeweler nodded. "Of course, I haven't signed the contract yet or even seen it. I didn't want him to misunderstand anything. And Mr. Cowan, whom I just saw, said it would take a while, but I thought perhaps you might trust me. I want to buy a present for someone very dear to me." The man smiled and said he would trust me and that I could pick out anything in the store. I picked out an object that cost $500 and ran to my lover's home and waited for him. He was quite overcome by the beauty of my present. Nobody had ever given him such an expensive object before. "But you haven't engraved it," he said, "from Marilyn to with love," or something like that. My heart almost stopped as he said this. "I was going to have it engraved," I answered, but changed my mind. "Why?" he asked. He looked very tenderly at me. "Because you'll leave me someday," I said, "and you'll have some other girl to love, and thus you won't be able to use my present if my name was on it. This way you can always use it, as if it were something you'd bought yourself." Usually when a woman says that sort of thing to her lover, she expects to be contradicted and soothed out of her fears. I didn't. At night I lay in bed and cried. To love without hope is a sad thing for the heart. It took me 2 years to pay the jeweler the $500. By the time I had paid the last $25 installments, my lover was married to another woman.
Yeah.
Even Marilyn gets heartbreak. Even Marilyn goes through heartbreak. Yeah.
Human universal.
It never. Yeah. We all. Again, it's for some reason this episode just has to be reminded we're all way more alike than we ever care to admit. It's a very, very scary thing. How
if you can see
are.
yourself as like, and it's weird because I can get to this place of empathy with her, and she's radically different than me, right? Just based on the things that seem to matter to people. But yeah, I feel like if you can see yourself in her, it's like, oh man, that's what's going on behind the scenes with everybody.
That's right? Why we're so entertained by drama, man.
Yeah.
It just shows us another life. But if we weren't all similar enough, we wouldn't be able to relate and it wouldn't be interesting. So, think about all the money and all of the time and all in the talent and energy that's put into film, television, media, novels. What is it that fascinates us so much? It's that, we want to understand the other. Yeah.
Right.
It's what our show's predicated on, I would say.
It is. Yeah.
All right. Moving on. Through Hyde, Monroe landed small roles in several films. Our future agent. Including 2 critically acclaimed works, Joseph Menkiewicz's drama All About Eve and John Huston's film noir The Asphalt Jungle. I've got a little bit from my story here about an audition she had. This book is just so rich. There's so much. I think this is fun. This is when she's auditioning for, I think, The Asphalt Jungle. So she's there in the room. Huston is there. A bunch of other men are present. They were all friendly and made jokes, but I couldn't smile. I felt also that I would never be able to recite a line. A pulse was pounding in my stomach. I couldn't have been more frightened if I were about to step in front of a locomotive to get run over. "Well," said Mr. Huston, "do you like the part?" I nodded. My mouth was too dry to try talking. "Do you think you can do it?" I nodded. I felt sick. I told myself a million times that I was an actress. I had practiced acting for years. Here finally was my chance at a real acting part with a great director to direct me. And all I could do is stand with quivering knees and a quivering stomach and nod my head like a wooden toy. Luckily, the men fell to making more jokes and seemed to forget about me. They laughed and kidded it as if nothing important was involved. But I could feel that behind his burst of laughter, Mr. Huston was watching me and waiting for me. I felt desperate. What was the use of reading in a shaking voice like a terrified amateur? Mr. Huston caught my eye and grinned. "We're waiting, Miss Monroe," he said. "I don't think I'm going to be any good," I answered. Everybody stopped talking and looked at me. "Would you mind if I read the part lying on the floor?" "Why not at all?" Mr. Huston replied gallantly. "Bill, here, we'll cue you." I stretched myself out on the floor and Bill crouched down beside me. I felt much better. I had rehearsed the part lying on a couch, as the directions indicated. There wasn't any couch in the office. Lying on the floor was almost the same thing, however. I went through the part with the crouching Bill reading Louis Calhern's lines. When I finished, I said, "Oh, let me do it again." "If you want to," said Mr. Huston, "but there's no need." I did it again. When I stood up, Mr. Huston said, "You were in after the first reading. Go fix yourself up with the wardrobe department." I knew this part wouldn't be cut out of the picture because it was vital to the plot. I was the reason one of the stars, Louis Calhern, committed suicide. My characterization was Mae West, Theta Barra, and Bo Peep in tight silk lounging pajamas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's making it. She's making it. And I just want to read another little bit about screen acting. This is very funny. In a movie, you act in little bits and pieces. You say 2 lines and they cut. They relight, set up the camera in another place, and you act 2 more lines. You walk 5 feet and they say cut. The minute you get going good is in your characterization. They cut, but it doesn't matter. There's no audience watching you. There's nobody to act for except yourself. It's like the games you play when you're a child and pretending to be somebody else. Yeah, screen acting is so wildly different from theater acting.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not an actor, but yeah. Fun. All right. So despite her screen time being only a few minutes in The Asphalt Jungle, she gained a mention in photoplay. And according to biographer Donald Spato, moved effectively from movie model to serious actress. In December 1950, Hyde negotiated a 7-year contract for Monroe with 20th Century Fox. Bam. However, according to its terms, Fox could opt to not renew the contract after each year. And this was her agent. And this is a bit about her writing about Johnny Hyde. The person I wanted to help most in my life, Johnny Hyde, remained someone for whom I could do almost nothing. He needed something I didn't have, love. And love is something you can't invent no matter how much you want to. He would say to me, "What kind of man do you think you will fall in love with someday?" And I'd answer, "I didn't know." I would beg him not to think of any tomorrow, but enjoy the life we were sharing together. One evening in his home, he started up the stairs to get me a book. I saw him stop on the landing and lean against the balustrade. I had seen my Aunt Anne do the same a few months before she died of a heart attack. I ran up to Johnny and put my arms around him and said, "Oh, Johnny, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you feel bad." "I'll be all right," he said. A week later, Johnny Hyde began asking me to marry him. Again, he had been to a doctor, and the doctor had told him he didn't have long to live. "I'm rich," he said to me. "I have almost $1 million. If you marry me, you'll inherit it when I die." I had dreamed of money and longed for it, but the $1 million that Johnny Hyde now offered me meant nothing. "I'll not leave you," I told him. "I'll never betray you, but I can't marry you, Johnny, because you're going to get well, and sometime later I might fall in love." He smiled at me. "I won't get well," he said, "and I want you to have my money when I'm gone." But I couldn't say yes. He was right. He didn't get well. A month later, he went to the hospital. In the hospital, he kept begging me to marry him, not for his sake anymore, but for mine. He wanted to think of me as never having any more hunger or poverty in my life, but I still couldn't marry him. Joe Schenck argued with me to do it. "What have you got to lose?" he asked. "Myself," I said. "I'm only going to marry for one reason, love." He asked me, "Which would you rather marry, a poor boy you loved or a rich man you liked?" "A poor boy I loved," I said. "I'm disappointed in you. I thought you were a smart girl, but Schenck seemed to like me more after our talk." Johnny Hyde died. His family wouldn't let me sit among them at the funeral. I sat in the back of the church among his acquaintances. When I passed by his coffin, I felt such a sadness for Johnny Hyde that I forgot myself. I threw myself on the coffin and sobbed. I wish I was dead with him. My great friend was buried. I was without his importance to fight for me and without his love to guide me. I cried for nights at a time. I never regretted the $1 million I had turned down, but I never stopped regretting Johnny Hyde, the kindest man in the world. So this is, he makes her career. I mean, he's,
I'm gonna
her agent. Yeah.
I'm gonna little Monday morning quarterback this. Okay.
Yeah.
$1 million.
Take the money.
$1 million in 1950 is over $12 million now. You take it. The guy's on death's door. He wants you to do it. I don't see any issues, frankly.
Right.
I've run it through my system. It's fine. Do it.
Take the money. Sell the top.
Yep.
Sell the top.
Yeah. And you can still try to have an acting career. Still do all
Johnny
of that.
Hyde had mooned.
Yeah. Right.
He had mooned. You sell that Johnny Hyde coin. Johnny Hyde, Inu. You sell that at the top. Johnny Hyde was ready. But that's never going to be a problem that you or I have.
No.